My son-in-law never saw me in the shadows. He was too busy FaceTiming his mother, a smirk plastered across his face. Yes, I already cut the brakes, he whispered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of my garage. The old man will hit curve number 9 tomorrow morning, and that will be it. See you at the funeral. I froze, my hand tightening around a heavy wrench. For a second I wanted to end him right there, but then a colder, darker thought took over. I quietly slipped away, waited for him to leave, and picked up the phone. I did not call the police. I called a tow truck. I had that death trap delivered straight to his father's driveway with a simple note: a gift from your loving son. What happened next was not just revenge, it was justice. My name is Desmond. I am 68 years old, a black man who has spent his entire life with grease under his fingernails and the smell of oil on his clothes. To the world, and especially to my arrogant son-in-law Blake, I am just a retired mechanic, a simple man who drives a rusted 1978 Chevy Silverado and lives in a modest house on the edge of town. Blake looks at me and sees a nobody. He sees a man who fixes things for people with real money. He sees a man who got lucky that his daughter Tasha is beautiful and smart enough to marry a stockbroker like him. But Blake does not know the truth. He does not know that I own the garage he stands in. He does not know I own the land it sits on and the 12 commercial properties surrounding it. He does not know that the grease on my hands is a choice, not a necessity. I work because I love machines. I love the honesty of an engine. An engine does not lie to you. It does not smile at your face while plotting to kill you. People do that. And last Tuesday, I learned exactly what kind of person my son-in-law truly is. Before I continue with this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. Now let me tell you how I turned a murder weapon into a family reunion. It was late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting long orange shadows across the driveway. I had gone out to my detached garage to grab my tackle box. I was planning to go fishing early the next morning, a little ritual I kept to clear my head. The garage is my sanctuary. It is a massive structure filled with classic cars. I am restoring rows of high-end tools and stacks of tires. It is where I think. It is where I breathe. I had just stepped into the back corner behind a wall of stacked winter tires when I heard the side door creak open. I stopped. I knew those footsteps. They were too light, too confident. They were the footsteps of a man who wears $500 Italian loafers to walk on a dirt floor. It was Blake. I stayed quiet. Usually I would step out and greet him, ask him how the market was doing, tolerate his condescending lectures about diversification. But something about his silence made me pause. He was not humming. He was not on a business call shouting buy or sell. He was moving with a purpose. I peered through the gap in the tires. Blake was standing next to my Chevy Silverado, my pride and joy, the truck I had driven for 20 years, the truck I was going to drive to the lake in less than 12 hours. He was holding something metallic in his hand, a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters, my bolt cutters, the ones I kept in the red toolbox by the door. He slid under the front of the truck. I heard the distinct, sickening crunch of metal snapping. Once, then twice. He slid back out, wiped the tool on a rag, and put it back exactly where he found it. He stood up, dusted off his suit pants, and pulled out his phone. He dialed a video call. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was casual light, as if he were discussing the weather. "It is done." I could not hear what the woman on the other end said, but I could hear Blake's laugh. It was a cold, hollow sound. "Yeah, the brake line is completely severed." He continued walking in circles around the garage, admiring his handiwork. "He is taking it to the lake tomorrow morning. You know that route. Curve number 9 is a steep drop. No guardrail. At 50 miles per hour with no brakes, he goes right through the trees and down into the ravine. It will look like a mechanical failure, just an old truck finally giving up on an old man." He paused, listening to his mother. Then he smiled a smile that made my blood run cold. "Don't worry about Tasha. She will be a mess, obviously. But that is good for us. A grieving widow needs her husband to handle the finances. Once the old man is gone, that house and whatever little life insurance he has is ours. I can finally pay off Rocco and get us back on track. I will see you at the funeral. Make sure you wear black." He hung up the phone, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out the side door whistling. He closed the door gently, leaving me alone in the dim light with the smell of gasoline and the weight of my own murder hanging in the air. I stood there for a long time. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a piston in a blown engine. My hands, large and scarred from decades of labor, were trembling, not from fear, never from fear. I was trembling with a rage so pure, so hot, it felt like I had swallowed a coal. He was going to kill me. He was going to murder the father of his wife, the grandfather of his future children, just to pay off a debt. And he was going to do it with my own truck. I stepped out from behind the tires. The silence in the garage was deafening. I walked over to the Silverado. I did not need to crawl under it to know what I would find. I dropped to one knee and shined my flashlight under the chassis. There it was. The brake fluid was already dripping onto the concrete, a slow, dark puddle forming like blood. The main line had been cut clean. He had known exactly where to cut. He had not just hacked at it. He had severed it in a way that the pedal would feel normal until I needed it most. Until I was going downhill. I stood up and wiped my hands on a rag. I looked at the bolt cutters he had used. He thought he was smart. He thought he was dealing with a simple mechanic who wouldn't notice a fluid leak, who wouldn't check his equipment before a trip. That was his mistake. He saw the grease on my clothes and assumed my brain was slow. I am a master mechanic. I spent 20 years in the motor pool of the United States Army before I opened my first shop. I can listen to an engine and tell you which valve is sticking. I can look at a tire tread and tell you how you drive, and I knew with absolute certainty that if I had driven this truck tomorrow, I would be dead. My first instinct was to call the police. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had the recording. I had the evidence. I could send him to prison for attempted murder, but then I stopped. Prison was too easy. If I called the police now, he would lawyer up. He would say he was just checking the truck. He would say the recording was taken out of context. He was a white man in a suit with expensive lawyers. I was a black man in work clothes. Even with the truth on my side, the system is slow. And Tasha, my sweet Tasha, she loved him. If I had him arrested tonight, she would not believe it. She would think I was framing him because I never liked him. It would break her heart, and she might hate me for it. No, this required a different kind of justice. A mechanic's justice. If something is broken, you don't just patch it. You find the source of the failure and you replace it. I looked at the truck. Then I looked at the puddle of fluid. An idea began to form in my mind. A dark, ironclad idea. Blake had prepared this vehicle for a specific purpose. He wanted someone to drive it and have a terrible accident. He wanted the truck to be a gift of death. Well, who was I to deny him his wish? I knew Blake's father, Walter. I had met him at the wedding and a few times since. Walter was a man cut from the same cloth as his son. He was loud, obnoxious, and obsessed with appearances. He drove a leased luxury sedan he couldn't afford and constantly bragged about his investments. But I also knew one other thing about Walter. He had a weakness for vintage American muscle. Every time he came over, he would eyeball my Silverado. "They don't make 'em like this anymore, Desmond," he would say, running his hand over the fender, ignoring the fact that I was the one who kept it running. "If you ever want to sell this beauty, you call me first." He coveted what I had, just like his son. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Big Mike. Mike was a young man I had trained 10 years ago. He ran a private towing company now off the books when needed, discreet and loyal to the bone. "Mike," I said when he answered, "bring the flatbed. I have a delivery to make." "Is everything okay, boss?" Mike asked. He still called me boss. "Everything is perfect, Mike. I just need to deliver a surprise gift." While I waited for Mike, I went into my office at the back of the garage. I took a piece of heavy cardstock and a pen. I wrote the note carefully. I wanted the handwriting to look casual, hurried. "Walter Blake told me how much you've always admired the truck. He convinced me it belongs with someone who truly appreciates American steel. It's yours. Keys are in the ignition. Take it for a spin, a gift from your son Blake." I stared at the note. It wasn't a lie. Not really. Blake had convinced me to give the truck away. By cutting the brakes, he made it useless to me. And it was a gift from him in a way. He had prepared it. He had engineered the outcome. I was just the delivery service. Mike arrived 20 minutes later. He backed the massive flatbed truck into the driveway with expert precision. He jumped out, a giant of a man with tattoos up his neck, and looked at the Silverado. "She looks fine, boss. Why are we towing her?" Mike asked. "Brake line is gone," I said calmly. "Don't try to drive it up the ramp. Winch it." Mike looked at me, then at the fluid on the floor. He saw the cut line. He looked back at my face. He saw the cold anger in my eyes. He didn't ask another question. He hooked up the winch and pulled the Silverado onto the bed of the truck. "Where to?" Mike asked, securing the chains. "Walter Vance's house, over in Oak Haven Estates. Drop it right in the driveway. Make sure the front points toward the street so it's easy for him to pull out." Mike nodded. "Consider it done." I watched as Mike drove away, my beloved truck disappearing into the night. It was a beautiful machine. I had restored it from a rust bucket. I had rebuilt the engine block myself. It hurt to let it go, but it was a small price to pay. I walked back into the garage and cleaned up the brake fluid from the floor with some sawdust. I wiped down the bolt cutters again, even though Blake's fingerprints were already all over them. I left everything exactly as it was. Then I went into my house. It was quiet. Tasha was working a late shift at the hospital. I sat in my recliner in the dark living room and waited. I did not turn on the TV. I did not turn on the lights. I just sat there, breathing in the silence, letting the adrenaline settle into a cold, hard resolve. I thought about Tasha. I thought about how she looked at Blake with stars in her eyes. She thought he was a successful businessman. She thought he was stressed because of the market. She didn't know he was a gambler. She didn't know he was in debt to people who break legs for a living. I knew. I had known for months. I had hired a private investigator the moment Blake started asking too many questions about my will. I had been waiting for the right moment to expose him. I wanted to save my daughter from the pain of a divorce, from the shame of a failed marriage. I wanted to protect her. But tonight Blake had escalated the game. He had moved from theft to murder. He had declared war. And in war, there is no mercy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Mike. "Package delivered. No one saw me. Left the note on the windshield." I smiled in the darkness. The trap was set. Walter lived at the top of a hill in Oak Haven. His driveway was steep. To get out of his subdivision, he had to drive down a long, winding road with several sharp turns. It was the perfect test drive for a man who loved speed and didn't check mechanics. I imagined Walter waking up the next morning. I imagined him seeing the truck in his driveway. I imagined his ego swelling. "A gift from my son," he would think. "Finally, the boy does something right." He wouldn't call Blake to thank him first. No, Walter was too greedy for that. He would want to drive it first. He would want to claim it. He would jump in, turn the key, and listen to that V8 roar. He would put it in gear, and then gravity would take over. I checked the time. It was almost midnight. Blake would be asleep next to my daughter, dreaming of spending my money. He would be dreaming of my funeral. He would be dreaming of the speech he would give, the fake tears he would cry. Let him dream. Tomorrow he would wake up to a nightmare. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady now. The trembling was gone. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had set the wheels in motion. I had returned the energy he had sent to me. I looked at the family photo on the fridge. Me, my late wife Sarah, and Tasha. We had built this life with hard work and honesty. We had faced racism, poverty, and tragedy, and we had survived. We had built something real. Blake thought he could take it all with a pair of bolt cutters. He was about to learn that you do not mess with a man who knows how to build things, because a man who knows how to build things also knows exactly how to take them apart. I went to my bedroom and laid out my clothes for the morning. Not my fishing gear. I laid out my best suit, a charcoal gray 3-piece suit I usually saved for church or special occasions. Tomorrow was going to be a special occasion. I needed to look my best when the news broke. I needed to look like a grieving father-in-law or perhaps a confused old man. I needed to be ready to play my part, because the play was just beginning. And the first act was going to be explosive. The next morning arrived with a silence that felt heavy and expectant. I was not at the lake. I was not casting a line into the misty water at sunrise. Instead, I was sitting in a windowless room beneath my old workshop, a space I had built years ago for security and privacy. The walls were lined with monitors, and on the desk in front of me, my phone sat face down. It was 6 in the morning, exactly when it began to vibrate. The buzzing sound against the metal desk was rhythmic and persistent. It was Blake. I did not answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I could picture him in his kitchen, pacing back and forth, coffee in hand, trying to mask his excitement with a veneer of concern. He was checking to see if I was dead yet. When I did not pick up, he waited exactly 3 minutes before dialing the next number. I tapped a key on my keyboard, and the audio from the listening device I had planted in his living room filled my speakers. "Tasha, wake up," Blake said, his voice laced with a fake, trembling anxiety that made my stomach turn. Your dad isn't answering his phone. I heard the rustle of sheets and my daughter's sleepy, confused voice. What time is it? He probably just doesn't have signal, Blake. You know how it is down by the river. No, Tasha. I have a bad feeling, Blake insisted. He pressed on, layering on the lies. He said he was going to verify the truck's fluids before he left. I told him the brakes felt a little soft last week, but he laughed it off. I should have insisted. If something happens to him, I will never forgive myself. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was planting the seed of the accident before the body was even found. He was establishing his alibi, painting himself as the concerned son-in-law who had tried to warn the stubborn old man. Tasha began to wake up fully, her voice rising in panic. I hated him for that. I hated him for making her worry, for making her cry over a tragedy he had engineered. But I had to let it play out. To save her from him, she had to see him break. Blake paced the room, the sound of his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. I watched the GPS tracker on his phone. He was stationary. He was waiting for the call. He was waiting for the police or a ranger to call and say they found a rusted Silverado crushed at the bottom of curve number 9. He was waiting to hear that he was a rich man. For 2 hours, he paced. He drank coffee. He feigned distress every time Tasha looked at him. But the moment she turned away, I could practically hear him calculating his share of the estate. He was so sure of himself. He was so sure that gravity and physics had done his dirty work. Then at 8:15, his phone rang. It was not me. It was an unknown number. Blake answered on the first ring, putting it on speaker so Tasha could hear. "Hello, is this Blake Vance?" a voice on the other end asked. It sounded professional, urgent. "Yes, this is Blake," he answered, his voice dropping an octave to sound somber. "This is St. Jude's Hospital Emergency Department," the voice said. "We have a patient here who was involved in a serious motor vehicle accident. He has you listed as his emergency contact." I leaned back in my chair. Here it was, the moment he had been dreaming of. Is he alive?" Blake asked. He tried to sound hopeful, but I heard the disappointment leaking through. He wanted them to say no. "He is in critical condition," the nurse replied. "You need to get here immediately." Blake hung up the phone and turned to Tasha. He grabbed her shoulders. "It happened." "Oh God, Tasha, something happened. We have to go." He rushed her out of the house. He drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic, running red lights. He was not rushing to save a life. He was rushing to confirm a death. He needed to see the body. He needed to be sure. I switched my feed to the audio on his phone as he entered the hospital. I could hear the chaos of the emergency room, the beeping of monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on tile. Blake marched up to the front desk, Tasha sobbing beside him. "We are here for the accident victim," Blake announced breathlessly. "The truck accident, room 4," the receptionist said, pointing down the hall. Blake led the way. He walked fast, practically dragging Tasha. He wanted to be the first to see. He wanted to look at my broken body and know that he had won. He reached the curtain of room 4 and ripped it open with a dramatic flourish. Dad Blake shouted, ready to launch into his rehearsed speech of grief, but the word died in his throat. The man in the bed was not me. The man in the bed was screaming, thrashing against the restraints, his face a mask of blood and contorted rage. His legs were elevated, encased in thick plaster casts that went all the way to his hips. It was Walter, Blake's father. Blake froze. His brain could not process the image. He stood there, mouth agape, his hands trembling in the air. Tasha gasped, her confusion evident. "Walter," she whispered. "Why is Walter here?" Walter saw his son and the screaming stopped for a split second, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "You!" Walter roared, pointing a shaking, bloodied finger at Blake. "You idiot! You tried to kill me!" "Dad!" Blake stammered, his face draining of all color. "What? Why are you—" "Where is Desmond? To hell with Desmond!" Walter shrieked. "He gave me the truck. He had it towed to my house last night. A gift," the note said. "A gift from my son." Blake stumbled back, hitting the wall. The room was spinning for him. The truck, my truck. The truck he had crawled under. The truck whose brake lines he had severed with his own hands. I had given it to his father. "I took it out this morning." Walter continued, his voice cracking with pain. "I wanted to show it off to the boys at the club. I was coming down Miller's Hill. I hit the brakes and the pedal went to the floor. Nothing. No resistance. I went straight through the guardrail and into the drainage ditch. Walter tried to sit up but fell back, groaning in agony. My legs, both of them shattered. The doctor says I might never walk right again. A police officer who had been standing in the corner of the room stepped forward. He had a notepad in his hand and a skeptical look on his face. "Sir," the officer said, addressing Walter, "we examined the scene. There were no skid marks. It looks like total mechanical failure." "It was that damn truck," Walter yelled. My son said it was a gem. He said he checked it over." The officer turned to Blake. His eyes were cold, assessing. "Are you the one who gave him the vehicle, sir?" the officer asked. Blake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. He looked at his father, broken and bleeding in the bed. He looked at Tasha, who was staring at him with wide, bewildered eyes. And he looked at the officer. If he said he knew about the brakes, he was admitting to attempted murder. If he said he cut them, he would be in handcuffs before he left the room. But if he said nothing, if he denied knowing anything, he was admitting to gross negligence. He was admitting that he gave his own father a death trap. I didn't..." Blake stuttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I thought it was fine. Desmond takes care of his trucks. It must have been a freak accident." "A freak accident," Walter spat. "You told me last week that truck was pristine. You told me you wished you could drive it. You sent it to me. I wanted to do something nice." Blake yelled back, his voice rising in panic. "I didn't know the brakes would fail." The officer scribbled something in his notebook. "We will have the vehicle impounded and inspected by a forensic mechanic," he said calmly. "If the lines were cut, we will know. Brake lines don't just disappear on their own." Blake turned a shade of gray I had never seen on a living human being. He knew exactly what the forensic mechanic would find. He knew his fingerprints were on the bolt cutters back in my garage, but he couldn't say a word. He had to swallow the scream building in his throat. "I stood there in the doorway," Tasha whispered, looking from her husband to her father-in-law. "I don't understand. Dad gave you the truck. Why would Dad give away his Silverado? He loved that truck." Walter looked at Tasha, his eyes narrowing. "He sent a note. Said Blake convinced him. Said Blake thought I deserved it more." Tasha turned to Blake. "You asked him to give his truck to your dad. I mentioned it." Blake lied, desperate to find a narrative that fit. "I didn't think he would actually do it. He must have been trying to be generous." "Generous," Walter groaned. "He almost killed me." Blake stood there paralyzed. He was vibrating with a mixture of terror and rage. He realized then that I wasn't dead. I was alive. I was somewhere out there and I had played him. I had taken his murder weapon and turned it against the only person in the world he actually cared about besides himself. He wanted to vomit. I could see it in his posture, the way he clutched his stomach. He had hurt his own father. He had crushed his father's legs. And now the police were going to inspect the truck. The officer stepped closer to Blake. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. We need to establish the chain of custody of the vehicle." "Now," Blake squeaked. "My father is in surgery prep," now the officer said firmly. "This was a serious accident involving critical injuries. We need to clear this up." Blake looked at Walter one last time. Walter didn't look back. He was staring at the ceiling, moaning in pain, muttering curses about mechanics and gifts. "I'll go," Blake whispered. "Tasha, stay here with him." As Blake walked out of the hospital room, flanked by the officer, he pulled his phone out. I watched on my screen as he tried to dial my number again. His hand was shaking so badly he dropped the phone twice. He needed to know where I was. He needed to know if I knew. I let it ring. I sat in my chair in the basement, sipping my cold coffee, watching the little dot on the map move toward the police station. He was in hell. He was walking through a minefield, and he had no idea that the explosion he had just survived was only the first one. He thought the worst part was over. He thought he just had to talk his way out of a mechanical failure. He didn't know that I had already cleaned the bolt cutters. He didn't know that I had replaced the ones in the toolbox with a brand new pair I bought cash 2 towns over. He didn't know that the forensic mechanic wouldn't just find cut lines. He would find a cut that was amateur. A cut made by someone who was in a hurry. A cut made by a man in a suit, not a mechanic. I leaned forward and spoke to the empty room. "You wanted a funeral. Blake, you wanted tears and tragedy. Well, you got the tragedy. But the funeral, that is going to have to wait, because I am just getting started." I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number. It was time for the next phase. It was time for Desmond to disappear completely. It was time for the ghost to haunt the living. "Prepare the boat," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "And leave my boots on the riverbank. Make it look like a struggle." I hung up. Blake was dealing with the police and his crippled father. Tasha was confused and alone at the hospital. Now I was going to give them exactly what they expected. I was going to give them a missing person. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. I had to move fast. The police would be calling Tasha soon to ask where I was. They would go to my house. They would find it empty. They would go to the river. And they would find exactly what I wanted them to find. The game had changed. It wasn't just about the truck anymore. It was about dismantling Blake piece by piece. It was about taking his confidence, his family, and his freedom. I walked out of the bunker and locked the heavy steel door behind me. The sun was shining bright outside, but for Blake Vance, the long, dark night had just begun. The riverbank was cold and slick with mud. The early morning mist clung to the water like a shroud, gray and heavy. I sat on a large, flat rock where I had spent countless mornings casting for catfish, but today there was no rod in my hand. I bent down and unlaced my boots. They were old Red Wings, scuffed and stained with oil from 40 years of mechanic work. I placed them side by side near the water's edge, careful to disturb the mud, just enough to look like a struggle, like a slip. Next to them I placed my wallet. It was thick leather, worn smooth by my back pocket. I left my driver's license visible. I wanted there to be no doubt. Then I took my phone. I looked at the screen one last time. A picture of Tasha and me at her college graduation smiled back. I felt a pang of guilt sharp enough to cut breath, but I pushed it down. I had to do this. I had to break her heart to save her life. I placed the phone next to the boots. I stood up in my socks. The damp earth seeped into the wool, chilling me. I took a deep breath of the river air, smelling the decay of leaves and the promise of rain. Then I turned my back on the river and walked into the woods. I moved quickly, sticking to the hard-packed deer trails where I wouldn't leave footprints. I circled back through the dense brush, keeping low, moving like a shadow until I reached the back of my property. My workshop loomed ahead. It was a metal building separate from the house, filled with tools and memories. But I wasn't going inside the main bay. I went around the back to a patch of overgrown kudzu that looked untouched for years. I pulled aside a rusted sheet of corrugated metal to reveal a heavy steel door set into the concrete foundation. It opened with a silent, well-oiled slide. I stepped into the darkness and locked the world out behind me. The bunker was cool and smelled of filtered air and ozone. It wasn't a doomsday shelter filled with beans. It was a command center. I flipped a switch, and the wall in front of me came to life. 12 high-definition monitors flickered on, bathing the room in a pale blue glow. I saw everything. I saw my kitchen empty and still the coffee pot cold on the counter. I saw the living room where Tasha's wedding photos still hung on the wall, a mockery of happiness. I saw the master bedroom, and most importantly, I saw the driveway. I settled into the leather chair, my eyes scanning the feeds. I was a ghost now, a spectator in my own life. It didn't take long. At 9:30 in the morning, a police cruiser rolled up the long gravel driveway. I watched the dust settle as Officer Miller stepped out. I knew Miller. I had fixed his transmission last winter for free because the city budget was tight. He looked grim. He took off his hat before he walked up the porch steps. I switched the audio feed to the living room as Tasha opened the door. Mrs. Vance Miller said, his voice heavy. Tasha was wearing her nursing scrubs. She looked tired. She looked beautiful. When she saw Miller, her hand went to her throat. "Is it Dad?" she asked. "Is he okay?" I watched my daughter crumble. It happened in slow motion. Miller said something about finding my boots and wallet by the river. He said something about the current being strong. He used words like presumed and search party, but Tasha didn't hear them. She let out a sound that tore through the speakers and pierced my heart. It was a raw animal wail of grief. She fell to her knees in the doorway. I gripped the armrests of my chair until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to run up those stairs. I wanted to burst through the hidden door and hold her. I wanted to tell her I was right here, but I couldn't. Not yet. Then Blake appeared. He came running from the kitchen, acting the part of the concerned husband. He wrapped his arms around Tasha, pulling her close. From the outside, it looked like a tender embrace. but I had a 4K camera positioned in the corner of the ceiling, and I zoomed in. Blake's face was buried in Tasha's neck, hidden from Officer Miller. But the camera caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. He wasn't crying, he wasn't sad. He was checking his watch. It was a gold Rolex I had given him as a wedding gift, a watch he didn't deserve. He looked at the time. Then he looked at Tasha with an expression of pure impatience. He patted her back mechanically like he was burping a baby. His eyes were cold, calculating. He was already doing the math. "Thank you, Officer Blake," said his voice trembling with fake emotion. We will wait for news. Please find him." Miller nodded and left. Blake closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, Blake's demeanor changed. He didn't guide Tasha to the couch. He didn't get her water. He left her sobbing on the floor and walked into the kitchen. I switched cameras. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't call his mother. He didn't call a friend. He dialed a number he had clearly memorized. "Hello, Arthur," Blake said. "Yeah, it's Blake. Listen, the police just left. The old man is gone." He paused, listening. No body yet. They found his shoes at the river. Looks like he fell in. He's gone, Arthur. I need to know the timeline." I leaned closer to the speaker. "What do you mean 7 years?" Blake hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I don't have 7 years. I don't have 7 days. There has to be a way to expedite the death certificate. He is missing, presumed dead. The river is fast. He could be halfway to the ocean." He listened again, his face twisting in anger. "Look, you are the lawyer. Figure it out. I need access to the estate. I need access to the accounts. The girl is a mess. She will sign whatever I put in front of her. Just draft the papers. I will handle the rest." He hung up and slammed the phone onto the counter. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. He was vibrating with nervous energy. He was a rat trapped in a corner, and he saw Tasha as his only way out. I watched him compose himself. He took a deep breath, adjusted his shirt, and put on his mask of grief. He walked back into the living room where Tasha was still sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. Baby Blake cooed, kneeling beside her. "I am so sorry. I can't believe this is happening." Tasha looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. He was going fishing," she whispered. "He loved that river. How could he fall? He was so careful." "It was an accident," Tasha Blake said soothingly. "Just a terrible accident. But we have to be strong. We have to do what Desmond would have wanted." He helped her up and led her to the sofa. He sat her down and held her hands. "Tasha, listen to me." He began, his voice taking on a serious, urgent tone. "The police are going to search, but you know how underfunded they are. They are going to drag the river for a day or two and then give up." "Give up?" Tasha cried. "They can't give up. That is my father." "Exactly," Blake said. "That is why we need to take matters into our own hands. We need to hire private divers. We need helicopters. We need the best search teams money can buy. We need to bring him home, Tasha." Tasha nodded frantically. Yes, whatever it takes. We have savings. We don't have enough." Blake lied smoothly. "Private search teams cost tens of thousands of dollars a day. But your dad, he had resources. He had accounts for emergencies." "He did?" Tasha asked, confused. "Dad always paid cash. I didn't think he had much in the bank." "He was private," Blake said. "But we can't access any of it to find him unless you have the authority. The banks won't talk to us. The insurance won't release funds for the search unless you are the administrator of his estate." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I recognized the letterhead. It was a general power of attorney. He had been carrying it around waiting for this moment. "I had this drafted a while ago," Blake said, lying through his teeth, "just in case of emergencies. Like a stroke or this. If you sign this, Tasha, I can go to the bank right now. I can unlock the funds. I can get a team in the water within the hour. Every minute counts, baby. Every minute he is in that water." He let the sentence hang, manipulating her hope, twisting her desperation. Tasha looked at the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at Blake, her eyes searching for salvation. She trusted him. She loved him. She didn't see the wolf in the designer suit. "I just want to find him," she sobbed. "I know," Blake said, producing a pen. "Sign this and I will make it happen. I will take care of everything. You just rest." He pressed the pen into her hand. He guided her hand to the signature line. I was screaming at the monitor in my bunker. Don't do it, baby girl. Don't give him the keys to the kingdom. He will drain every cent. He will sell the land. He will burn your legacy to pay his bookies. But she couldn't hear me. She was weak with grief and he was strong with greed. She touched the pen to the paper. I grabbed my burner phone. I had one card to play. I couldn't stop her physically, but I could interrupt the moment. I had Strickland, my attorney, on standby. I had told him to wait for my signal. I texted Strickland a single word. Now. On the screen, Tasha began to write the first letter of her name. The ink flowed onto the paper. Blake leaned in, his eyes hungry, his breath held. He was seconds away from total control. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the thick atmosphere of the living room. Tasha jumped the pen, skidding across the paper, ruining the signature. Blake's head snapped toward the door, a look of pure fury crossing his face for a fraction of a second before he masked it. Who is that? Blake snapped. We are grieving. We don't want visitors. I'll get it, Tasha said, wiping her eyes. It might be the police. It might be news. No, you stay here, Blake said, putting a hand on her arm. Finish signing. I will handle the door. But Tasha was already standing up. She needed news. She needed hope. She walked past him to the door. Blake stood there, the unsigned document in his hand, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. He looked at the paper, then at her retreating back. He looked like he wanted to scream. Tasha opened the door. Standing on the porch was a tall, severe-looking white man in a black suit. He held a briefcase and wore wire-rimmed glasses. It was Strickland. My lawyer. The man who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the holes. Mrs. Vance, Strickland asked. Yes, Tasha said. My name is Arthur Strickland. I was your father's personal attorney. Blake appeared behind Tasha. Get lost, he barked. We haven't even found the body yet, and the vultures are circling. We have our own representation. Strickland looked at Blake. He didn't blink. He didn't step back. He looked at Blake the way a lion looks at a gazelle that doesn't know it's dead yet. Mr. Vance, Strickland said calmly. I am not here to solicit business. I am here because I hold Mr. Bell's living will and specific instructions regarding his disappearance. Blake froze. Disappearance. What instructions? Strickland stepped into the house, forcing Blake to step back. Mr. Bell was a cautious man, Strickland said, walking into the living room and placing his briefcase on the coffee table right on top of Blake's power of attorney document. He anticipated that there might be confusion regarding his assets in the event that he went missing without a confirmed death. Tasha looked at Strickland with wide eyes. Did he know something was going to happen? Strickland opened his briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He knew that there were sharks in the water, Mrs. Vance, and he left me here to make sure they didn't bite. I watched from my bunker, a grim smile on my face. Blake looked like he was going to be sick. He stared at Strickland, then at the document he had been trying to get Tasha to sign. He realized in that moment that the game was not going to be as easy as he thought. He realized that even from the grave or the bottom of a river, Desmond Bell was fighting back. What is in that briefcase? Blake demanded, his voice cracking. Strickland pulled out a thick file. Debt. Strickland lied smoothly. Massive, crippling debt. According to these records, Desmond Bell owes approximately $500,000 to various creditors. And if you assume control of his estate, Mrs. Vance, you assume immediate liability for those debts. Blake's face went white. Tasha gasped. 500,000, Blake whispered. That's impossible. He was a mechanic. He was a man with secrets, Strickland said, staring directly into Blake's eyes. And secrets, Mr. Vance, have a way of surfacing when the water recedes. I leaned back in my chair in the bunker. The hook was set. Blake thought he was chasing a pot of gold. He just found out he was chasing a bomb, and watching him try to defuse it was going to be the show of a lifetime. The silence in the living room stretched tight and thin like a piano wire about to snap. Strickland stood there like a statue carved from granite, his hand resting on the thick file folder he had placed on the coffee table. The leather of his briefcase was open, revealing a chaotic mess of red ink and urgent stamps. Blake was staring at the file as if it were a radioactive isotope that had just been dropped into his lap. His mouth hung open slightly, a little strand of saliva connecting his lips, ruining his perfectly curated image of the grieving, capable son-in-law. $500,000, Blake repeated the words, tumbling out of his mouth without any of their usual arrogance. That is a mistake. That has to be a mistake. Desmond was a mechanic. He fixed transmissions. He didn't have $500,000 in debt. Who would lend a mechanic that kind of money? Strickland did not blink. He did not offer comfort. He simply reached into the file and pulled out a promissory note. It was printed on heavy cream-colored paper, the kind that lawyers use when they want to scare you. He slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped inches from Tasha's trembling hand. "It is not a mistake," Mr. Vance Strickland said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "It is a private equity loan from a group called Shadow Creek Holdings. High risk, high interest. Mr. Bell took it out 3 years ago. He used the house, the land, and the garage as collateral." Tasha reached out and touched the paper. Her fingers were shaking so bad she could barely feel the texture. "Dad," she whispered, tears streaming down her face again. "Why? Why would he do this?" He never said anything. "He always told me we were okay. He was a proud man," Mrs. Vance Strickland said. "He didn't want to worry you, but the terms of the loan are very specific and very aggressive. Upon the death or disappearance of the principal borrower, the full amount becomes due immediately." "Immediately," Blake squeaked. His face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of green. "Immediately," Strickland confirmed. "And there are penalties, late fees, accrued interest. If you sign that power of attorney, Mrs. Vance, if you assume control of the estate right now, you are essentially stepping into your father's shoes. You are telling Shadow Creek Holdings that you accept liability. They will come for the house. They will come for the garage. And if those assets do not cover the debt, they will come for you." I watched Blake's face on the high-definition monitor in my bunker. It was a masterpiece of internal destruction. I could see the gears grinding in his head. He was doing the math. He owed Rocco $200,000. He had been counting on my estate to pay that off and leave him with a nice cushion. Now he was looking at a deficit. He was looking at a financial black hole. If he took control, he wouldn't get a payday. He would get a lawsuit. He would get bankruptcy. He looked at Tasha. For a moment, just a split second, I wondered if he would step up. I wondered if there was a single ounce of decency buried under that Italian suit. I wondered if he would say, "We will figure this out together, Tasha. I will help you carry this burden." But I knew Blake. I knew him better than he knew himself. Blake's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. He looked at the power of attorney document sitting on the table, the one he had been practically forcing Tasha to sign just moments ago. The ink from her aborted signature was still wet. Suddenly he moved. It was a violent, jerky motion. He snatched the power of attorney document off the table. He didn't just pick it up. He clawed at it. "No," Blake shouted. His voice was loud, startling Tasha. "Blake," Tasha asked, looking up at him with wide, wet eyes. "What are you doing?" "I am saving us," Blake yelled. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He squeezed it until his knuckles turned white. Then he ripped it. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the quiet house. He tore it in half, then in quarters, then he threw the confetti pieces onto the floor. "We are not signing that," Blake said, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "We are not taking responsibility for this mess. Your father, he lied to us." Tasha stood up slowly. She looked at the pieces of paper on the floor, then at her husband. She looked confused, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Blake, he is missing," Tasha said, her voice trembling. "He might be dead. How can you worry about money right now? How can I not?" Blake screamed. He began to pace the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. He turned on Tasha, his face twisted into a snarl. I had never seen him direct at her before. "Do you understand what this means, Tasha?" He was broke. He was worse than broke. He was a pauper wrapped in debt. He pointed a finger at the empty air as if accusing my ghost. He walked around like he was so high and mighty. Blake ranted, giving me looks, judging my car, judging my job, and all this time he was drowning. He was a fraud. Tasha, a complete fraud. Tasha flinched as if he had slapped her. "Stop it," she said softly. "Don't talk about him like that. I will talk about him however I want." Blake yelled. "He almost ruined me. We were counting on that inheritance." The words hung in the air, heavy, ugly, revealing. Tasha went still. She wiped a tear from her cheek, but no new ones fell. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "We were counting on it," she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. What do you mean, Blake? Why were you counting on it? Blake froze. He realized he had said too much. He realized he had let the mask slip. He scrambled to pull it back up, but it was tattered now. I meant, for our future, Tasha, he stammered, but the aggression was still there, bubbling under the surface. For our kids. He should have left something for his grandchildren. Instead, he left us a bill for $500,000. It is selfish. It is irresponsible. He turned to Strickland, who was watching the scene with the impassive expression of an undertaker. You can take your briefcase and get out, Blake spat at the lawyer. We are not signing anything. We are not accepting the estate. Let the bank take the house. Let them take the garage. I don't want any of it. Strickland nodded slowly. He closed his briefcase with a sharp click. I will note your refusal to administer the estate, Mr. Vance, Strickland said calmly. However, Mrs. Vance is the next of kin. The decision is ultimately hers. No Blake stepped between Strickland and Tasha. She is my wife, her debts are my debts, and I am telling you we are walking away. We are washing our hands of Desmond Bell. He turned to Tasha, grabbing her arm. We are leaving, Tasha. Pack a bag. We are going to my parents' house. I can't stay here. I can't look at this house knowing it belongs to the bank. Tasha looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face, red and sweaty with greed and fear. She looked at the ripped paper on the floor. Let go of me, she said. It wasn't a scream. It was a statement. Cold and hard. Blake blinked. What I said, let go of me, Tasha repeated. She pulled her arm away. She took a step back, putting distance between them. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She saw the panic. She saw the selfishness. She saw the man who minutes ago was rushing her to sign a paper to find her father and now was ready to abandon her father's memory over a debt. My father is missing, Tasha said, her voice gaining strength. He might be cold. He might be hurt. And you are worried about the bank taking the house. I am worried about our survival, Blake argued, throwing his hands up. You are worried about money, Tasha corrected him. You have always been worried about money. She turned to Strickland. Mr. Strickland, Tasha said, standing tall. I don't care about the debt. I don't care if I have to work for the rest of my life to pay it off. I am not abandoning my father. If I need to sign that paper to find him, I will sign it. No. Blake lunged for the briefcase, but Strickland was faster. He pulled it back. I think it is best if I give you both some time to process this, Strickland said smoothly, backing toward the door. I will be in my office. Call me when you have reached a consensus. Or when you are ready to proceed alone, Mrs. Vance. Strickland walked out the door. Blake slammed it behind him. He turned to Tasha, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. You are an idiot, Blake hissed. You are going to ruin us. Get out, Tasha said. Blake laughed, a harsh barking sound. This is my house too, Tasha. Not if we don't pay the debt right, Tasha shot back. Isn't that what you said? It belongs to the bank. So get out. Go to your parents. Go cry to your mother about how you didn't get your payday. But leave me alone to find my father. Blake stared at her. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw that he had pushed too far. He grabbed his keys off the counter. Fine, he spat. I am leaving. And when you are living in a cardboard box because of that old man's mistakes, don't come crawling back to me. He stormed out. I heard his car start in the driveway. I heard him peel out gravel spraying against the porch. Tasha stood alone in the living room. She looked at the door. Then she looked at the photos on the mantel. Photos of me teaching her to ride a bike. Photos of us fishing. She sank onto the sofa and buried her face in her hands. She wept, but these were different tears. These were tears of mourning, not just for her father, but for her marriage. She was mourning the man she thought Blake was. Down in the bunker, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. I felt a profound sadness for my daughter, but also a fierce pride. She had passed the test. Blake had failed. I leaned back and looked at the monitors. I looked at the file Strickland had left on the table in my mind's eye. Shadow Creek Holdings. It sounded intimidating. It sounded real. It was real, in a sense. It was a company incorporated in Delaware 5 years ago. I owned it. I owned 100% of it. I had created Shadow Creek Holdings for exactly this purpose. I knew that one day people might come sniffing around my money. I knew that visible wealth made you a target. So I built a shield, I bought up the debt of failing businesses and consolidated them under Shadow Creek. I made myself the debtor and the creditor. Technically, Desmond Bell, the individual, owed Desmond Bell, the corporation, $500,000. It was a paper loop, a financial ghost. I could forgive the debt with a stroke of a pen. I could dissolve the company tomorrow and the debt would vanish like smoke. But Blake didn't know that. He saw a number and he ran. He saw a liability and he showed his true colors. He proved that his love for Tasha was conditional. It was conditioned on her coming with a dowry. It was conditioned on her being an asset, not a burden. I watched Tasha cry on the monitor. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to call her right now and say, "It is fake, baby. It is a trap for him, not for you. I am rich. You are rich. We are safe." But I couldn't. Not yet. Blake was wounded, but he wasn't finished. He was desperate now. He owed money to Rocco and his golden parachute just turned into an anvil. He would be panicking. And a panicked man is a dangerous man. But a panicked man also makes mistakes. He would go to his father. He would go to Walter. And together, they would try to find another way. They would try to find the money. And that was when I would catch them. I pulled up the feed from the GPS tracker I had installed on Blake's car weeks ago. He was heading straight for the hospital. He was going to cry to his daddy. "Good," I whispered to the empty room. "Go tell him. Go tell him the old man was a fraud. Go tell him you cut the brakes for nothing." I reached for my phone and sent a text to Strickland. Phase 1 complete. She stood her ground. He ran. Get ready for Phase 2. I stood up and walked over to the small cot I had set up in the corner of the bunker. I needed rest. I had to be sharp. The next few days were going to be a chess match, and I had just sacrificed my queen to take his king. Tasha was safe from him now. She knew. She might not know the whole truth, but she knew enough. She knew he was a coward. She knew he was greedy. The spell was broken. Now it was time to make him pay. It was time to tighten the screws. Blake needed money. He needed $200,000 in 48 hours, or Rocco was going to start breaking bones. I knew Rocco. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his type. And I knew that Blake would do anything to avoid that meeting. He would steal. He would lie. He would sell anything he could get his hands on. And I was going to make sure the only thing he could find to steal was a one-way ticket to a prison cell. I lay down on the cot and closed my eyes. The image of Tasha standing up to him played over and over in my mind. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My daughter was a warrior. She just needed a reason to fight. I smiled in the darkness. "You picked the wrong family, Blake," I whispered. "You picked the wrong family." Blake retreated to the rental condo he shared with Tasha on the other side of town. He did not go to his parents' house yet. He needed a moment to breathe, a moment to drink something strong and stare at the wall. I watched him through the camera I had installed in the smoke detector 3 months ago. He poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and sank into his beige sofa, loosening his tie until it hung around his neck like a noose. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had bet the farm and watched the tornado carry it away, but his night was about to get much worse. At 9 o'clock there was a knock at his door. It was not a polite knock. It was a heavy, rhythmic pounding that rattled the frame. Blake jumped, spilling his drink on his pants. He stared at the door with wide, terrified eyes. He knew that knock. He scrambled to wipe the whiskey off his lap and walked to the door. He checked the peephole and flinched. He opened the door slowly. Standing there was a man named Rocco. I knew Rocco by reputation. He was a white man, built like a vending machine with a neck as thick as a tree stump and eyes that looked like dead fish. He wore a tracksuit that cost more than my truck, and he smelled of expensive cologne and violence. Rocco was a loan shark. He was the kind of man you went to when the banks laughed at you and your credit cards were maxed out. Blake had gone to him 6 months ago. Rocco stepped inside without being invited. He looked around the condo, sniffing the air. 2 other men, large and silent, waited in the hallway. "Nice place," Blake Rocco said. His voice was gravel, grinding on glass. "Smells like fear and cheap whiskey." Blake tried to smile. It was a pathetic, twitching grimace. "Rocco, I wasn't expecting you until Friday." "Plans change," Rocco said, walking past him and sitting on the arm of the sofa. "I heard about your father-in-law. Terrible tragedy, missing in the river, presumed dead." Blake swallowed hard. "Yeah, it is awful. We are devastated." Rocco nodded slowly. "Devastated. I bet. But here is the thing, Blake. Tragedy is expensive. Funerals, lawyers, search parties, it drains a man's resources, and I started to worry. I started to worry that in all your grief you might forget about your friends. You might forget about the $200,000 you borrowed to cover those bad bets on the ponies. I have it under control, Blake stammered. I told you, the insurance, the inheritance, the old man is loaded. He has land. He has the shop. Rocco held up a hand to stop him. I heard different, Rocco said softly. I have ears all over this town, Blake. I heard a lawyer visited the house today. I heard there is a debt, $500,000 to a holding company. Blake turned pale. How do you know that it is my business to know? Rocco snapped, his voice losing its fake pleasantness. If the estate is in debt, you get nothing. If the bank takes the house, you get nothing. And if you get nothing, Blake, then I get nothing. And I do not like getting nothing. It is a mistake, Blake pleaded, backing away until he hit the wall. The lawyer is lying, or the old man was hiding money. I just need time to find it. He has cash. I know he has cash. He didn't trust banks. It has to be in the house. Rocco stood up and walked over to Blake. He invaded his personal space looming over him. He reached out and grabbed Blake's left hand. He held it gently, almost tenderly. You have 48 hours, Blake. Please, Rocco, I need a week. 48 hours, Rocco repeated. 200,000. Cash. If you don't have it, I am going to take this pinky finger, and then I am going to come back every day for another one until you learn how to count cards better. Or until you bleed out. Rocco squeezed Blake's finger. Blake whimpered, his knees buckling. 2 days, Rocco whispered. Find the money, or find a surgeon. Rocco let go of his hand, patted him on the cheek, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Blake slid down the wall and sat on the floor. He was hyperventilating. He looked at his hand, curling his fingers into a fist as if to protect them. He was trapped. He was drowning. And panic, pure and primal, was starting to take the wheel. He stayed on the floor for 10 minutes. Then a look of madness entered his eyes. He stood up. He grabbed his keys. He didn't call Tasha. He didn't call his father. He ran out the door. I switched my feed to the external cameras at my house. Tasha was gone. She had likely gone to stay with her friend Sarah, unable to be in the house alone with the memories. The house was dark. 20 minutes later, Blake's car skidded into my driveway. He didn't park. He abandoned the car on the lawn, the door left open. He ran up the porch steps. He didn't use a key. He kicked the front door. He kicked it again and again until the jamb splintered and the door flew open. He was inside. I watched him move through my home like a hurricane. He was not looking for documents anymore. He was looking for cash. He was convinced, thanks to his own prejudice, that a man like me would bury jars of money in the backyard or stuff it in a mattress. He started in the living room. He flipped the sofa over. He took a pocket knife and slashed the leather cushions, pulling out handfuls of stuffing, searching for hidden bundles of bills. He smashed the lamps. He tore the paintings off the walls and smashed the frames against the floor. Nothing. He moved to the kitchen. He pulled all the food out of the pantry. He swept the dishes off the shelves, shattering plates that my wife and I had bought 30 years ago. He opened the freezer and dumped the ice onto the floor. He ripped the baseboards off the cabinets. Nothing. He was screaming now incoherent curses directed at me. He hated me. He hated me for not being the rich victim he wanted. He hated me for being a debt-ridden mechanic. He hated me for making him look like a fool in front of Rocco. He ran down the hall to my bedroom. He tore the sheets off the bed. He flipped the mattress. He opened the closet and threw my clothes onto the floor. He stomped on my work boots. He pulled out the drawers of my dresser and dumped them out. He found my watch box. It had a few nice pieces in it. He stuffed them into his pocket. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't even cover the interest on his loan. He needed the mother lode. He stormed into my home office. It was a small room at the back of the house where I kept my manuals and my fishing logs. There was a heavy oak desk in the center. Blake went straight for it. He tried to open the drawers. Locked. He didn't look for the key. He picked up a heavy brass lamp and smashed the lock mechanism. He pulled the drawer open so hard it came off the tracks. He dumped the contents. Papers, invoices, receipts for parts. No cash. Where is it? He screamed, kicking the desk. Where is the money, you old fraud? He spun around his chest, heaving. He looked at the walls. He looked at the bookshelf. He began pulling books down, shaking them to see if money fell out. He tore the pages out of my first edition repair manuals. Then he stopped. He was looking at the wall behind the desk. There was a large framed photograph there. It was a picture of the first garage I ever bought back in 1985. It was black and white. Blake stared at it. He noticed that the frame was slightly thicker than the others. He noticed that it was bolted to the wall, not hung on a wire. He walked over to it. He grabbed the frame and pulled. It didn't budge. He smiled, a twisted, manic smile. He ran out of the room. I watched him on the hallway camera running toward the garage. He came back a minute later carrying a crowbar and a heavy sledgehammer. He wedged the crowbar behind the picture frame. He leaned his entire weight into it. The drywall cracked. The wood groaned. With a loud snap, the picture frame popped off the wall, taking a chunk of plaster with it. Behind the picture was a wall safe. It was a serious safe. Heavy steel digital keypad biometric scanner. It looked like it held millions. Blake dropped the crowbar and fell to his knees in front of it. He was laughing and crying at the same time. He kissed the cold steel door. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew you were holding out." He tried the handle. Locked. He tried typing in random numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. His birthday. Tasha's birthday. Nothing worked. The safe beeped angrily at him. He picked up the sledgehammer. He swung it with all his might. Clang. The hammer bounced off the steel door, vibrating in his hands. He swung again. And again. He was in a frenzy. He dented the drywall around the safe, but the door held firm. He threw the hammer down. He needed something stronger. He needed fire. He ran back to the garage. I watched him rummage through my welding equipment. He grabbed an acetylene torch and a pair of goggles. He dragged the heavy tanks into the house, the hoses trailing behind him. He lit the torch. The blue flame hissed. He pulled the goggles over his eyes. He spent an hour cutting. The smell of burning metal and drywall filled the house. Sparks flew everywhere, singing the carpet. He worked with a desperate focus. He cut the hinges. He cut the locking mechanism. He sweated and cursed, but he didn't stop. Finally, the metal gave way. The door of the safe groaned and swung open, hanging by a thread of molten steel. Blake turned off the torch. He ripped the goggles off his face. He reached into the dark cavity of the safe, his hands trembling with anticipation. He expected stacks of $100 bills. He expected gold bars. He expected his salvation. He pulled out the contents. It was a single thick manila envelope. Blake frowned. He looked inside the safe again. It was empty. Just the envelope. He ripped the envelope open. He dumped the contents onto the floor. There was no money. Not a single dollar. Instead, dozens of photographs spilled out. Blake picked one up. It was a photo of him walking into the Golden Horseshoe Casino 3 months ago. The timestamp was in the corner. He picked up another. It was a photo of him at a pawn shop selling a necklace I recognized as Tasha's anniversary gift. He picked up another. It was a photo of him sitting at a table in a dimly lit restaurant holding hands with a woman who was definitely not my daughter. She was blonde, she was young, and she was kissing his cheek. He picked up another. It was a photo of him meeting with Rocco in an alleyway. Rocco was handing him an envelope of cash. Blake looked terrified in the photo. There were bank statements too, copies of his bank statements, highlighted lines showing transfers to gambling sites, highlighted lines showing payments to hotels. Blake stared at the photos scattered on the carpet. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. The color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. He realized in that cold, silent room that there was no treasure. There was only a record of his sins. He realized that I hadn't been hoarding money. I had been hoarding evidence. He realized that I had been watching him for years. I knew about the gambling. I knew about the cheating. I knew about the loans. I knew everything. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes wild. He looked right at the smoke detector where my camera was hidden. "You knew," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "You knew the whole time." He scrambled backward away from the photos as if they were burning him. He hit the wall and slid down. He put his head in his hands and let out a scream of pure frustration. He had broken into my house. He had destroyed my property. He had worked for hours to cut open a safe. And all he had found was his own destruction. He had 46 hours left to pay Rocco. He had $0. And now he knew that his enemy wasn't just a dead mechanic. His enemy was a ghost who knew his every secret. I watched him cry. I watched him crumble. And I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. He wanted to find my hidden value. He just found it. My value was the truth. And the truth was about to set his world on fire. I reached for my phone. It was time for the next move. Tasha needed to see this. She needed to see what was in that safe. but not yet. First, she needed to see the ring. I zoomed in on the monitor. Blake was gathering the photos, trying to stuff them back into the envelope. He was going to try to burn them. He was going to try to hide the evidence, but he was sloppy. In his panic, he missed one photo. It slid under the desk. And he didn't check his pockets. He still had my watches. And in the pocket of his jacket, the jacket he had thrown over the chair when he started working with the torch, was the ring. My wife's ring. He had stolen it weeks ago. I had let him take it because I knew it would be the nail in his coffin. I watched him run out of the house, clutching the envelope of photos to his chest. He left the front door wide open. He left the torch burning a hole in the rug. He left chaos in his wake. He was running scared. He was running blind. I picked up the phone and dialed Strickland. He took the bait I said. He saw the photos. He is terrified. Call Tasha. Tell her the police reported a break-in at the house. Tell her she needs to go check to see if anything is missing, specifically her mother's jewelry. I hung up. Tasha would go to the house. She would see the destruction. She would see the open safe. And she would find the ring missing. And then she would find Blake. The trap was closing. And Blake Vance was running out of places to hide. I watched my daughter drive across town through the lens of a traffic camera I had access to. She was not going to my house. She was going to the condo she shared with Blake. She was going there to pack a bag, to get away from the memory of him, to find some sanctuary. She did not know that sanctuary was the last place she would find peace that night. She entered the condo with a key that felt heavy in her hand. The place was dark. Blake was not there. He was still running, still clutching that envelope of photos, terrified of his own shadow. But in his haste to leave earlier that evening before he broke into my home, he had left his suit jacket thrown carelessly over the back of a dining chair. Tasha turned on the light. She looked at the jacket. It was a charcoal gray designer piece, something he had bought with a bonus he claimed he earned, but which I knew came from my bank account. She walked over to it. She wasn't looking for evidence. She was looking for closure. She grabbed the jacket, intending to throw it into the hallway to purge his scent from her space. But as she lifted it, something fell out of the inside pocket. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull metallic clink. Tasha looked down. It was a small velvet pouch, the kind jewelers use. Next to it was a crumpled piece of yellow paper. She knelt. Her movements were slow, as if she were moving underwater. She picked up the pouch. She opened the drawstrings. She tipped it over into her palm. A gold ring slid out. It was a simple band set with a modest diamond that caught the overhead light. I saw her freeze on the camera feed. I saw the breath leave her body. It was her mother's wedding ring. My Sarah's ring. I had given it to Tasha on her wedding day. I had told her to keep it safe. But 2 weeks ago it had gone missing. Blake had told her she must have lost it at the hospital. He had helped her look for it. He had held her while she cried over losing the last piece of her mother. And all this time it had been in his pocket. Tasha stared at the ring. Then she reached for the crumpled yellow paper. She smoothed it out. It was a receipt from a pawn shop downtown. Gold Standard Pawn, dated 3 days ago. The receipt listed a diamond necklace, a pair of pearl earrings, and a tennis bracelet. Items Tasha rarely wore. Items she kept in a jewelry box in the bedroom. He had pawned them. He had sold her jewelry to pay the interest on his gambling debts. But he had kept the ring, not out of sentiment. The receipt had a handwritten note on the bottom. Offer too low. Try exclusivity dealer on 5th. He hadn't kept it because it was her mother's. He had kept it because he wanted more money for it. I saw Tasha's face change. The sadness evaporated. The confusion vanished. In their place came a look of absolute cold revulsion. She stood up, clutching the ring so tight her knuckles turned white. She looked at the jacket on the chair. She didn't throw it. She dropped it as if it were covered in disease. She didn't scream. She didn't break anything. She simply walked to the door, opened it, and walked out. She got into her car. She didn't call Blake. She didn't call the police. She called Strickland. I met him at his office. She said, her voice flat and dead over the car's Bluetooth. I need to know everything. I watched her drive. She was driving fast. She was driving with purpose. She was coming to the one man who had told her the truth. Strickland was waiting for her. His office was in a high-rise downtown, a fortress of glass and steel. It was late, almost midnight, but the lights were on. I had texted him. I had told him she was coming. I had told him it was time. Tasha walked into the lobby. She didn't look at the security guard. She went straight to the elevator. When she reached the top floor, Strickland was standing by the door of his office. He ushered her in. She walked to his desk and slammed the ring down on the mahogany surface. "He stole it," she said. "He stole my mother's ring. He stole everything." Strickland looked at the ring. He looked at Tasha. He saw a woman who had been pushed to the edge of her sanity. "He is a desperate man," Mrs. Vance Strickland said gently, "and desperate men do terrible things." "He lied to me," Tasha whispered. "He looked me in the eye and told me I lost it. He watched me cry. How could he do that? How could anyone do that? Because he does not see you as a wife," Strickland said. "He sees you as a resource, and resources are meant to be used." Tasha sank into the chair opposite the desk. She looked small. She looked broken. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I don't know who he is anymore. I thought he loved me. I thought he loved Dad." Strickland sat down. He folded his hands on the desk. He looked at the phone sitting next to his legal pad. It was my old burner phone, the one I had given him for this exact moment. Tasha Strickland said, his voice dropping to a solemn register. "There is something you need to hear, something your father wanted you to hear, but only if it became absolutely necessary." Tasha looked up. "What did he leave a message in a way?" Strickland said. He picked up the phone. He navigated to the audio files. He selected the file dated 2 days ago. The file labeled Garage. He pressed play. The sound was crystal clear. The acoustics of the garage amplified every word. "Hey, Mom." Blake's voice rang out. It was casual. It was cheerful. Tasha flinched. She recognized the tone. It was his happy voice. "It is done." Blake's voice continued. "Yeah, the brake line is completely severed. He is taking it to the lake tomorrow morning. Curve number 9 is a steep drop, no guardrail. At 50 miles per hour with no brakes, he goes right through the trees and down into the ravine." Tasha stopped breathing. She stared at the phone as if it were a snake. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "It will look like a mechanical failure," the recording played on. "Just an old truck finally giving up on an old man. Don't worry about Tasha. She will be a mess, obviously. But that is good for us. A grieving widow needs her husband to handle the finances. Once the old man is gone, that house and whatever little life insurance he has is ours." Then came the laugh. That cold, hollow laugh. "See you at the funeral." Strickland pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Tasha sat frozen. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her face had drained of all blood. She looked like a statue of shock. For 10 seconds she did not move. Then her body reacted before her mind could process the horror. She leaned forward, clutching her stomach, and retched. She vomited onto the expensive rug of Strickland's office. She heaved her body, trying to expel the poison of the revelation. It was a visceral, violent rejection of the man she had shared a bed with. Strickland did not flinch. He handed her a wastebasket and a box of tissues. He waited. Tasha wiped her mouth. She was trembling violently. She spat into the bin. She took a deep, shuddering breath. He cut the brakes," she whispered. The word sounded foreign in her mouth. "He tried to kill him. He tried to kill my dad." "Yes," Strickland said. "He talked about it like it was a business deal," Tasha said, her voice rising, cracking, "like he was ordering lunch. He was going to kill him, for money, for a house." She stood up. She paced the office, her hands gripping her hair. "He hugged me," she screamed. "He hugged me this morning and told me it was going to be okay. He held me while I cried about Dad missing, and he did it. He caused it." She stopped pacing. She looked at Strickland. "And then I saw the shift. I saw the moment the grief turned into logic. I saw the moment the daughter of a master mechanic started to put the pieces together." She looked at the phone on the desk. She looked at the ring. She looked at Strickland. "Wait," she said. Her voice was steady now, cold. Strickland watched her. "If he cut the brakes," Tasha said slowly, "if he cut the brakes yesterday, then Dad would have driven the truck this morning. He would have crashed." She paused, her mind racing. "But the police found his boots by the river. They found his wallet. They said he fell in. They didn't find a truck in a ravine." She looked at Strickland, her eyes narrowing. "And this recording. Who recorded this?" Blake was talking to his mother. "He wouldn't record himself confessing to murder." Strickland said nothing. He just watched her. "Someone else recorded it," Tasha said. "Someone was in the garage. Someone heard him." She took a step toward the desk. "If someone heard him, they would have stopped him. Or they would have warned Dad." She looked at the empty chair next to Strickland. "My dad is careful," she whispered. "He checks his truck. He knows every sound it makes. If the brakes were cut, he would know. Or someone told him. She looked Strickland dead in the eye. He isn't dead, is he? Strickland allowed a very small, very faint smile to touch his lips. Tasha slammed her hands on the desk. Answer me. He isn't dead. He wouldn't let me hear this if he was dead. He wouldn't let Blake win. He would fight. She grabbed the lapels of Strickland's jacket. Where is he? Where is my father? Strickland gently removed her hands. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Your father is a man who prepares for every eventuality, Mrs. Vance. When he heard that recording, he had a choice. He could go to the police. But he knew the police might not be enough. He knew you loved your husband. He knew you wouldn't believe it without proof. He turned back to her. He had to show you who Blake really was. He had to let Blake destroy himself. Tasha brought her hand to her mouth. He did this. For me. He faked his death. For me. He saved his own life, Strickland corrected. But yes, the theater, the missing boots, the debt, it was all to show you the truth, to show you what happens when the money dries up, to show you what kind of man Blake is when he thinks nobody is watching. Tasha sank back into the chair. She looked at the ring on the desk. She looked at the phone. He gave the truck to Walter, she realized. At the hospital. Walter said Dad gave him the truck. Blake looked like he had seen a ghost. Exactly, Strickland said. Your father returned the gift. Tasha started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. He gave the truck with no brakes to Blake's dad. Oh my God, that is exactly something he would do. She wiped her eyes. The tears were gone. In their place was a hard, flinty look. It was the look of a woman who had just survived a fire and was ready to burn the arsonist. Is he watching? Tasha asked, looking around the room. Strickland nodded. He is safe, and he is waiting. Tasha stood up. She picked up her mother's ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. What do I do? She asked. You finish it, Strickland said. Blake is cornered. He is broke. He is terrified, but he still thinks he has a chance. He still thinks he can find the money. He thinks he can manipulate you one last time. He can't, Tasha said. Good, Strickland said. Because tomorrow he is going to try to sell the land. He found a deed in the office. It is a forgery your father planted, but Blake doesn't know that. He thinks he owns the old industrial lot behind the shop. He has a buyer lined up, a chemical company that wants to dump waste. Tasha's jaw tightened. He would sell Dad's land for a dump. He would sell his own soul for $1 right now, Strickland said. He needs you to sign the deed. He will tell you it is to pay off the debt, to save the house. Tasha smoothed her skirt. She adjusted her blouse. She looked like a queen preparing for war. Tell Dad I am ready, she said. Tell him to get the paperwork ready. I will sign whatever he wants. Strickland raised an eyebrow. You will? I will sign it, Tasha said. I will let him think he has won. I will let him walk into that meeting thinking he is the smartest man in the room. She walked to the door. She stopped and looked back. And then I want to be there when the floor drops out from under him. I want to see his face when he realizes he lost everything. She opened the door. I am going to the condo, she said. I am going to wait for him, and when he comes crawling back begging for help, I am going to be the best wife he has ever seen. Until tomorrow. She walked out. I watched her go onto the monitor. I felt a lump in my throat the size of a fist. My little girl was gone. In her place was a woman made of iron. She knew. She was with me. I picked up my phone and texted Strickland. Let her run the show. She is ready. I sat back in the darkness of the bunker. The final act was approaching. Blake thought he was fighting a confused widow and a dead mechanic. He had no idea he was stepping into the ring with a tag team of vengeance. Tomorrow, we would end this. Tomorrow, Blake Vance would learn the true cost of betrayal. The next morning, while Tasha prepared for her performance of a lifetime, I turned my attention to the other snake in the grass, Walter Vance. He was still in the hospital, his legs shattered, his pride wounded, and his greed more inflamed than ever. I watched him on the hidden camera I had installed in his hospital room disguised as a smoke detector. He was on the phone screaming at someone. I want $1 million, Walter shouted into the receiver. Minimum. That truck was a death trap. I am suing the estate of Desmond Bell for negligence, emotional distress, and loss of livelihood. I don't care if he is missing. Sue the estate. He slammed the phone down onto the bedside table. He was suing me. He was suing the man who he thought had given him a gift. He didn't care that I was missing. He didn't care that his son was married to my daughter. He saw an opportunity. He saw a payday. The door to his room burst open. It was Blake. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot. His suit was wrinkled and he smelled of stale sweat and panic. He had spent the night in his car terrified of Rocco, terrified of the police, terrified of everything. "Dad, what are you doing?" Blake hissed, closing the door behind him. "I just got a call from a lawyer. You are suing Desmond's estate." "Damn right I am," Walter yelled. "Look at me. I am crippled. That piece of junk truck almost killed me. I deserve compensation. You have to drop the lawsuit," Blake said, his voice trembling. "You have to drop it right now. Drop it." "Are you crazy?" Walter scoffed. "That estate is worth money. The house, the land, the shop. I'm going to take a big chunk of it before the bank does." "Dad, listen to me." Blake grabbed the rails of the bed and leaned in close. His face was inches from his father's. "You can't sue. If you sue, the insurance company will investigate. The police will investigate. They will examine the truck. So what? Let them examine it. The brakes failed. They didn't fail. Dad," Blake whispered, his voice a harsh rasp, "they were cut." Walter froze. He looked at his son. He saw the terror in Blake's eyes. "Cut?" Walter asked slowly. "Who cut them?" "I did." Blake confessed the words exploding out of him. "I cut them. I cut them to kill Desmond." The silence in the room was absolute. Walter stared at his son. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "You cut the brakes?" Walter asked. "You told me you took care of it. You told me the old man was going to have an accident." "I did," Blake said. "He was supposed to drive it, not you, Desmond. He gave it to you. He tricked us." Walter leaned back against his pillows. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "So you tried to kill your father-in-law and you ended up crippling your own father. That is rich, Blake. That is really rich." "It was a mistake," Blake pleaded. "But you have to drop the lawsuit. If they find out the lines were cut, they will trace it back to me. I will go to prison for attempted murder. And if I go to prison, I can't pay Rocco. And if I can't pay Rocco—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Walter looked at his legs. Then he looked at Blake. "I don't care about Rocco," Walter said coldly. "I care about my legs. I care about my retirement. I care about the fact that I am stuck in this bed because of your incompetence. Dad, please." "No," Walter interrupted. "You listen to me. I am not dropping the lawsuit. In fact, I am going to increase the demand. 2 million. Dad, you are signing my death warrant." "Not mine," Walter said. "Yours. You made this mess. You clean it up. And if you go to prison, well, at least I will have the money from the lawsuit to comfort me." Blake stared at his father. He realized in that moment that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Walter didn't care about his son. He cared about himself. He was willing to send Blake to prison if it meant he got a payout. "I hate you," Blake whispered. "The feeling is mutual," son Walter replied. "Now get out. I have to call my lawyer back." Blake turned and ran out of the room. He was sobbing. But he didn't notice the nurse standing in the corner checking the IV bag. She was a quiet woman, middle-aged, with kind eyes. She had been in the room the entire time. She had heard everything. She finished adjusting the drip. She checked Walter's vitals. She smiled at him. "Is there anything else I can get you, Mr. Vance?" she asked sweetly. "Just my phone." Walter grunted. She handed him his phone. Then she walked out of the room. She walked down the hall past the nurse's station into the break room. She closed the door and locked it. She pulled a small digital recorder out of her pocket. The red light was still blinking. She pressed stop. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Bell," she said when I answered. "I got it. Every word." "Good work, Sarah," I said. "Bring it to the shop tonight." Sarah was my niece, my sister's daughter. She was a nurse at St. Jude's. I had put her through nursing school when her father ran off. She was family, and she was loyal. I hung up the phone. I had the confession. I had Walter admitting he knew about the plan. I had Blake admitting he cut the brakes. It was over. I could end it now. I could send the recording to the police and have them both arrested within the hour. But I wasn't done yet. Blake was broken, but he was still walking. He still thought he had a chance. He still thought he could sell the land. And Walter thought he was going to get a payday. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized they had nothing. I wanted to see them turn on each other when the walls truly closed in. I wanted the finale. I texted Tasha, "It is done. The recording is secure. Are you ready for tomorrow?" Her reply came instantly. "I am ready. Let's finish this." I leaned back in my chair. The pieces were all in place. The stage was set. Tomorrow, Blake Vance was going to try to sell a toxic dump to a chemical company. He was going to sign his name on a fraudulent deed. He was going to think he had won. And then I was going to introduce him to the real owner of Shadow Creek Holdings. I was going to introduce him to his worst nightmare. Me. Blake returned to my house the next morning. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. His suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale coffee and desperation. But there was a manic energy about him now, a frantic, vibrating hope. He had 40 hours left until Rocco came to collect a finger, and he was running out of options. I watched him from my bunker. He went straight to my home office. He didn't look at the safe he had destroyed. He didn't look at the photos scattered on the floor. He went to the filing cabinet in the corner, the one he had ignored in his search for cash. I had planted the bait there 3 weeks ago. It was a thick leather-bound folder labeled Property Deeds. It looked official. It looked valuable. Blake pulled it out. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a deed to the land my shop sat on. 5 acres of prime industrial real estate on the edge of town. The deed listed me, Desmond Bell, as the sole owner. I saw his eyes widen. I saw the greed wash over his panic like a soothing balm. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Henderson Blake," said his voice cracking. "It is Blake Vance." "Yes. Listen. I have the deed. I have it in my hand." He listened, pacing the room, stepping over the debris he had created the night before. "I know you were interested in the property last year," Blake said. "You wanted it for the expansion, for the storage facility." I leaned in. Storage facility. That was a polite way of putting it. Henderson represented Apex Chemical. They wanted a place to dump industrial runoff. They wanted a place to bury barrels of sludge that glowed in the dark. They had offered to buy me out 5 years ago. I had told them to get off my property before I introduced them to my tire iron. "Yes, 500,000, Blake said. "Cash. Fast closing. We can do it tomorrow." He paused. "My wife is the sole heir. She will sign. She just wants to settle her father's debts. We can meet at the notary." He listened again, a smile spreading across his face, a smile that made him look like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Tomorrow afternoon. Perfect. We are holding a memorial service for him in the morning at the house. We can sign the papers right after." It is poetic, really. Saving his legacy on the day we say goodbye. He hung up the phone and let out a whoop of joy. He kissed the folder. "You saved me, old man," he whispered to the empty room. "You finally came through." He didn't care about the land. He didn't care that Apex Chemical would poison the groundwater. He didn't care that he was turning his father-in-law's life's work into a toxic waste dump. He only saw the money. He saw $500,000, $200 for Rocco, $300 for himself. He saw a way out. He ran out of the house, clutching the folder to his chest. He was going to find Tasha. He was going to sell her the lie. I picked up my burner phone and texted Tasha. "He found the deed. He is coming to you. He wants to sell the shop land to Apex Chemical for $500,000. Agree to everything." I watched Tasha receive the text on the camera in her condo. She looked at her phone. Her expression didn't change. She didn't look angry. She looked ready. 20 minutes later, Blake burst into the condo. Tasha was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked calm, composed. Blake threw the folder onto the table. "I found a solution," he announced, breathless. "I found a way to save us." Tasha looked at the folder. "What is this?" "It is the deed to the shop land," Blake said. "I called a buyer, an old contact of mine. They are willing to pay $500,000 for it." "500,000?" Tasha asked, feigning surprise. "That covers the debt to Shadow Creek." "Exactly," Blake said. "It covers the debt. It saves the house. It saves your inheritance." He sat down opposite her, taking her hands in his. "Tasha, I know I was upset yesterday. I know I said terrible things, but I was scared. I was scared of losing our future. But this fixes everything. We just need to sell the land." "Who is the buyer?" Tasha asked. Blake hesitated. "Just a logistics company. They need a warehouse." It is a good deal, Tasha. Dad would want us to save the house. He wouldn't want his debt to ruin you. Tasha looked at him. She looked at the man who was lying to her face about selling her father's legacy to a poison factory. She looked at the man who had tried to kill me. And then she smiled. It was a small, sad smile. You are right, Blake, she said. Dad would want us to be safe. So you will sign? Blake asked, squeezing her hands. I will sign, Tasha said. Blake slumped in his chair, relief flooding out of him. Thank God. Thank God. We have to do it tomorrow, Blake said. The buyer is in a rush. We can do it after the memorial service. The memorial service, Tasha asked. Yes, Blake said. We need to hold a service. For closure, people are asking, and it looks better for the sale if we are moving forward. Tasha nodded slowly. Okay, a memorial service. At the house, Blake said. Tasha stood up. I will get my black dress ready. Blake stood up too. He tried to hug her. Tasha let him. She stood stiff in his arms, her eyes open, staring over his shoulder at the wall. I am going to go make the arrangements, Blake said, pulling away. You rest. Tomorrow is going to be a hard day. Oh, Blake, Tasha said softly. You have no idea. Blake left the condo whistling. He thought he had won. He thought he had maneuvered his way out of the trap. He thought he was the smartest man in the world. He didn't know that the deed in that folder was worthless paper. He didn't know the truth about that land. I sat in my bunker staring at the map of my properties on the wall. The shop land, those 5 acres. 10 years ago, the city approached me. They wanted to build a park, a green space for the neighborhood kids. They wanted to revitalize the area. They didn't have the budget to buy the land at market value. I didn't sell it to them. I donated it. I signed the papers a decade ago. The land belongs to the city parks department. It is a public trust. The only reason it is still a shop is because I have a lifetime lease to operate my business there for $1 a year. But the ownership, that belongs to the people. The deed Blake found was a copy of the old deed, a copy I had kept for sentimental reasons. It had no legal standing. It was a ghost document for a ghost property. Blake was about to walk into a notary office and try to sell a public park to a chemical company. He was about to commit fraud on a massive scale. He was about to take money for something he didn't own, based on the authority of a dead man who was very much alive, an Apex Chemical. They were not nice people. When they found out they had been scammed, well, Rocco would look like a teddy bear compared to their legal team. I leaned back in my chair. The stage was set, the memorial service, the grieving widow, the greedy son-in-law, the fake deed, and the resurrection. It was going to be a hell of a show. I picked up my phone and dialed Strickland. It is a go, I said. Tomorrow at the house. Make sure the police are nearby, and tell the sheriff I have a present for him. What present? Strickland asked. I looked at the bolt cutters sitting on my workbench, the ones Blake had used. I had retrieved them. I had bagged them. The murder weapon, I said, with fingerprints. I hung up. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of the bunker. I looked at myself. I looked tired. My eyes were heavy, but there was a fire in them that hadn't been there in years. Tomorrow Desmond Bell was coming back from the dead, and he was bringing judgment with him. The morning of my memorial service dawned gray and humid. From my bunker beneath the garage, I watched my own house transform into a stage for the final act of Blake Vance's tragedy. He had hired a cleaning crew at dawn to scrub away the evidence of his rampage from the night before. He had rented chairs. He had ordered flowers, lilies. I hate lilies. They smell like death even when they are fresh. Blake was running on adrenaline and terror. He had 40 hours left on Rocco's clock, but he thought he had found the loophole. He thought the fake deed to the shop land was his golden ticket. But to cash it, he needed to play the role of the grieving, responsible executor. He needed to show the world, and more importantly, his creditors, that he was in charge. I watched the guests arrive. It was a pathetic turnout. A few of my old fishing buddies showed up looking confused and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Mrs. Gable from the bakery came clutching a handkerchief. But the majority of the crowd was not there to mourn Desmond Bell. They were there to collect from Blake Vance. I recognized the type. Men in cheap suits that were too tight across the shoulders, Men who stood with their backs against the walls, scanning the room not for memories but for assets. I saw a representative from the gambling ring. I saw a man I suspected worked for the bank where Blake held his maxed-out credit cards. And in the back row, sitting like a stone gargoyle, was Rocco himself. Blake had invited them. It was a desperate power move. He wanted them to see him in the big house. He wanted them to see him presiding over the estate. He wanted to signal to them that the money was coming. "Look at me," his eyes seemed to say. "I am the heir. I have the assets. Just give me a few more days." It was the behavior of a man who was drowning and trying to sell the water to the sharks circling him. Blake stood by the fireplace shaking hands. He looked solemn. He looked respectable. He was wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car. He nodded gravely at people he didn't know. He accepted condolences for a man he had tried to murder. "Thank you for coming," I heard him say through the microphones. "It means so much to Tasha and me. Desmond was a private man, but he touched so many lives. It made me sick. I wanted to turn off the sound, but I couldn't. I had to witness every second of his hypocrisy. I had to let him climb as high as he could so the fall would shatter him completely." Tasha stood a few feet away from him. She was wearing a simple black dress. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She looked like a marble statue. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't cry. She just stared at Blake. She watched him work the room like a politician. She watched him smile that practiced, charming smile at the men who wanted to break his legs. She was waiting. She was holding the remote control to the large flat-screen television Blake had set up in the corner for a photo slideshow. At 10 o'clock sharp, Blake clapped his hands for attention. The room went quiet. He stepped to the center of the living room, standing on the very rug he had burned with a welding torch just 2 nights ago. He had covered the burn mark with a flower arrangement. "Friends. Family." Blake began, his voice dropping to a husky, emotional register. "We are gathered here to celebrate the life of Desmond Bell." He paused for effect. He looked down at his shoes, then up at the ceiling as if looking for me in heaven. "Desmond was a simple man," Blake continued. "He didn't care about fancy things. He cared about hard work. He cared about his truck. He cared about this land." He gestured vaguely around him. "When I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, he told me one thing. He told me, 'Blake, you take care of her. You protect her.' And I promised him I would." I gripped the edge of my desk. The audacity of this man. He was rewriting history in real time. "This week has been a nightmare," Blake said, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. "Losing him so suddenly, so tragically. The accident at the river, it has left a hole in our hearts that can never be filled." He looked over at the creditors. He made eye contact with Rocco. "But we must move forward. Desmond would not want us to wallow in grief. He would want us to secure the future. He would want us to make sure Tasha is taken care of. And that is what I intend to do. As the administrator of his estate, I pledge to honor his legacy by making the hard decisions necessary to protect this family." He was laying the groundwork. He was telling them he was about to sell the land. He was telling them the check was in the mail. He was wonderful. Blake sniffed. "He was a father to me. He taught me so much. I will miss him every day." He hung his head. A perfect performance. A few of the neighbors sniffled. Rocco just crossed his arms, unimpressed. Blake looked up, his eyes dry, his face composed. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Tasha and I appreciate your support during this transition." He started to step back, confident that he had pulled it off. He thought he had bought himself time. He thought he had fooled them all. Then Tasha stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Blake looked at her surprised. This wasn't in the script. He frowned slightly, a flash of annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it back into concern. "Tasha," Blake asked gently, "do you want to say a few words?" Tasha didn't look at him. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the creditors. She looked at Rocco. "Yes," she said. Her voice was clear. It wasn't shaking. It was the voice of a judge reading a sentence. "Before we conclude," Tasha said, "I have something I want to share. Blake has spoken so beautifully about my father, about his legacy, about how much he loved him." She turned to Blake. She smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You said he was like a father to you, Blake." "He was," Blake said, wary now. "I wanted to show everyone exactly what kind of son you were," Tasha said. "I found a video, a very special video. I think it captures the true nature of your relationship with my father perfectly." Blake relaxed slightly. He thought she had found an old home movie. Maybe a clip from the wedding. He nodded, trying to look supportive. "That sounds lovely, Tasha," he said. "Please, show us." Tasha raised the remote control. She pointed it at the 60-inch screen in the corner. "This is for you, Dad," she whispered. She pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a grainy home movie from the 90s. It was crisp, high-definition black and white footage. It was footage from a security camera. The room went silent. The image on the screen was unmistakable. It was the interior of my garage. The date stamp in the corner was from 3 days ago. In the center of the frame was my Silverado, and underneath it, sliding out on a creeper, was Blake. The guests squinted. They leaned forward. Blake frowned, confusion clouding his face. He didn't recognize the angle at first. Then the audio kicked in. "Hey, Mom!" Blake's voice boomed through the high-quality speakers of the sound system. "It is done!" Blake froze. His face went slack. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like a wax figure. On the screen, the digital Blake stood up. He was holding a pair of large red bolt cutters. He wiped them with a rag. He looked directly at the camera, unaware he was being filmed. A smug, self-satisfied grin on his face. "Yeah, the brake line is completely severed." The recording continued. "The old man will hit curve number 9 tomorrow morning, and that will be it." A gasp went through the room. It started as a low ripple and exploded into a collective intake of breath. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth with her hands. The fishing buddies stood up, knocking over their chairs. Blake stood paralyzed. He was watching himself confess to murder in front of everyone he owed money to, in front of the police chief who had stopped by to pay his respects, in front of his wife. "See you at the funeral," the Blake on the screen said with a laugh. The video froze on that frame. Blake laughing, holding the tool he used to try and kill me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. Tasha lowered the remote. She looked at Blake. "You were right, Blake," she said into the silence. "You did make it to the funeral." Blake started to shake. He looked at the screen. He looked at the crowd. He looked for an exit, but the room was packed. That is a fake," Blake screamed. His voice cracked high and hysterical. "It is AI. It is a deep fake. Someone made that." "I never did that." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Desmond hated me," Blake yelled, spinning around to face the crowd. "He set me up. He made that video to frame me. He is crazy." He looked at Rocco. Rocco wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Blake, and he was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized he didn't have to wait 48 hours to collect. He knew Blake was finished. "You have to believe me," Blake pleaded, grabbing Tasha's arm. "Tasha, baby, you know me. I wouldn't do that. I love you. I love your dad." Tasha looked at his hand on her arm. She didn't pull away this time. She just looked at it with disgust. "You cut the brakes, Blake," she said calmly. "You tried to kill him for insurance money, and then you tried to sell his land to a chemical company." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the deed Blake had given her that morning. The fake deed. She threw it at his chest. "You are a murderer," she said, "and you are a thief, and you are a liar." The papers fluttered to the floor around Blake's feet. No, Blake shrieked. He looked like a cornered rat. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He saw the police chief, Chief Miller, stepping forward, his hand moving to his belt. "It isn't real," Blake yelled. "There is no proof. Just a video. Anyone can make a video. You need the truck. You need the tool. You don't have anything." He was right in a legal sense. A video could be challenged. A video could be argued away by expensive lawyers. He needed to be caught with the smoking gun. He needed physical evidence. That was my cue. I stood up in the bunker. I adjusted my tie. I checked my cufflinks. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. It was time to raise the dead. I walked to the door of the bunker. I climbed the stairs to the hidden panel in the back of the pantry. I pushed it open. I stepped into my kitchen. I walked down the hallway. I could hear Blake screaming in the living room, denying everything, his voice getting more and more desperate. I reached the double doors of the living room. I paused. I took a deep breath. Then I pushed the doors open. They swung wide with a heavy thud. The room went silent again. This time it wasn't shock, it was awe. I stood there framed by the doorway. I wasn't wearing my mechanic's jumpsuit. I was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit tailored to perfection. I stood tall. I stood strong. "Hello, Blake," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and it filled the room without the need for a microphone. Blake turned slowly. He looked at me. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. He looked like he was having a stroke. "Desmond," he whispered, you are dead." I walked into the room. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked straight up to Blake. I stopped inches from his face. I could smell the fear coming off him in waves. "I am very much alive, son," I said. Blake stumbled back. He tripped over his own feet and fell onto the rug. He scrambled backward, crab, walking away from me as if I were a demon. "No," he whimpered. No. I saw the boots. You fell in." I stepped closer. "You were right about one thing, Blake," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. "A video can be faked. Technology is a scary thing." I pulled out a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside lay the red bolt cutters. "But this," I said, holding the bag up so everyone could see, "this is real." I tossed the bag onto his lap. The heavy steel clanked against his legs. "I fished these out of the toolbox where you hid them," I said. "I bagged them before anyone else touched them." "Your fingerprints are all over the handles, Blake. Your DNA is on the grips, and the metal shavings in the teeth. They match the brake line on my Silverado perfectly." Blake looked at the bolt cutters. He looked at me. He realized there was no way out. The walls had closed in. The ceiling had come down. He was buried. Chief Miller stepped forward. He put a heavy hand on Blake's shoulder. Blake Vance Miller said, his voice grim, "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Desmond Bell and for the assault with a deadly weapon on Walter Vance." Walter, Blake whispered. "Oh yes," I said. "Your father is very upset about his legs, Blake. He gave a full statement this morning. He told the police everything. He told them you confessed to him at the hospital." Blake looked at Tasha. She was standing next to me now. She took my hand. She squeezed it. "Tasha, please." Blake sobbed. "Help me." Tasha looked down at him. She looked at the man she had married. "My father gave you a gift, Blake," she said. "He gave you a chance to be a good man, and you threw it away." She turned her back on him. "Get him out of my house," she said to the chief. Miller hauled Blake to his feet. He slapped the cuffs on. The sound of the ratchets clicking tight was the sweetest music I had ever heard. As they dragged him out, Blake started screaming. He screamed about the money. He screamed about Rocco. He screamed that it wasn't fair. Rocco watched him go. He tipped his head at me, a silent acknowledgement of a game well played, and slipped out the back door. He would find other ways to collect. The room erupted into chaos. The guests were shouting, asking questions. But I didn't care. I hugged my daughter. I held her tight while she finally let go and cried into my shoulder. "It is over, baby," I whispered. "It is over." But it wasn't quite over. There was one more loose end, one more rat to catch. Walter Vance was still in the hospital thinking he was a victim, thinking he was going to sue. I looked at Strickland. He nodded. He knew what to do. We were going to pay Walter a visit, and we were going to bring him the bill. The room erupted into chaos the moment the video froze on that damning image of Blake laughing with the bolt cutters. It was a sound like a dam breaking, a collective gasp that turned into a roar of whispers and accusations. People were standing up, knocking over their folding chairs, craning their necks to get a better look at the screen, and then at the man who was supposed to be grieving. Blake stood in the center of the storm, his face drained of every drop of color until he looked like a corpse himself. His hands were shaking so violently that he looked like he was seizing. He stared at the screen at his own image, and for a split second I saw the absolute terror of a man who knows he has dug his own grave. But Blake was a survivor. He was a cockroach, and cockroaches do not give up just because you turn on the lights. He snapped. He lunged toward Tasha, his eyes wild and manic. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek that grated on the ears. "Turn it off right now! It is fake! It is all fake!" He spun around to face the crowd, waving his arms frantically. "Do not look at that. It is AI. It is a deep fake. You know what technology can do these days. Anyone can make a video like that." Desmond hated me. He hated that I was successful. He probably paid someone to make this to frame me from the grave. He was a sick old man. He looked at Rocco, the loan shark, standing in the back with his arms crossed. "Rocco, you know me. You know I wouldn't do this. This is a setup. They are trying to cheat me out of my inheritance so they don't have to pay my debts." Rocco did not move a muscle. He just stared at Blake with dead shark-like eyes. He knew a con when he saw one, and he knew that Blake was drowning. Blake turned back to Tasha. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her skin. Tasha did not flinch. She stood like a statue of ice, staring through him. "Tell them, Tasha," Blake pleaded, shaking her. "Tell them your father was crazy. Tell them he had a vendetta against me. We are married. We are a team. If I go down, you go down." Tasha slowly reached up and peeled his hands off her shoulders. She dropped them as if they were covered in filth. She did not say a word. She just looked at the double doors at the back of the room. "It isn't real," Blake yelled again, spinning in a circle looking for anyone who would believe him. "You need physical evidence. You need the truck. You need the tool. A video proves nothing in court. Any lawyer will tell you that. It is just pixels. It is a lie." He was panting now, sweat pouring down his face, ruining his expensive makeup. He looked at Chief Miller. "Chief, arrest her," Blake shouted, pointing at Tasha. "Arrest her for defamation. This is slander. You can't let them do this to me in my own house." Chief Miller just adjusted his belt. He didn't reach for his handcuffs. Not yet. He was waiting. He was waiting for the cue. Blake let out a hysterical laugh. "See? You have nothing. You have a cartoon, a movie. I am the administrator of this estate. I am the one in charge here. And I am ordering everyone to get out. Get out of my house." He thought he had won. He thought that by shouting the loudest he could drown out the truth. He thought that because I was dead there was no one left to challenge him. He was wrong. I stood up in the bunker. I smoothed the lapels of my suit. I checked my tie in the reflection of the monitor. I looked like a different man. The grease was gone. The oil-stained jumpsuit was gone. The hunch of a tired mechanic was gone. In the mirror, I saw Desmond Bell, the owner of Shadow Creek Holdings. I saw a man who commanded millions. I saw a father who was about to defend his child. I walked up the stairs from the bunker. I pushed open the hidden panel in the pantry. I stepped into the kitchen. The air in the house was thick with tension. I could hear Blake's voice still ranting in the living room, desperate and shrill. I walked down the hallway. My dress shoes made a solid, authoritative sound on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. I reached the double doors of the living room. I paused for one heartbeat. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and betrayal. Then I pushed the doors open. They swung wide with a heavy, expensive thud that echoed through the room. The noise cut through Blake's screaming like a knife. The room went instantly silent. 150 heads turned toward the doorway. I stood there framed by the light from the hallway. I stood tall. I stood strong. I looked at the crowd, meeting the eyes of my neighbors, my friends, and the predators Blake had invited. And then I looked at Blake. He was standing in the middle of the room, his mouth open mid-scream. He froze. His eyes bulged out of his head. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He took a staggering step back, his legs hitting the coffee table. "Desmond," someone whispered. It was Mrs. Gable. The whisper turned into a ripple. "Desmond. He is alive. It is him." I stepped into the room. The crowd parted for me instinctively, clearing a wide path straight to my son-in-law. I walked slowly. I didn't rush. I wanted him to see me coming. I wanted him to see every step. Blake began to shake. It started in his hands and spread to his whole body until he was vibrating like a tuning fork. He shook his head back and forth, a silent denial of reality. "No," he whimpered. "No. I saw the boots. You fell in. The current. You can't be here." I stopped 3 feet in front of him. I towered over him. He shrank down, looking small and pathetic in his stolen suit. "Hello, Blake," I said. My voice was deep and calm. It filled the room without effort. He made a noise in his throat, a strangled squeak. You are a ghost," he stammered. "I am very much alive, son," I said, "and I heard everything." Blake looked around the room, searching for an exit, searching for an explanation. He looked at Tasha. She was standing next to me now, her hand on my arm. She wasn't surprised. She was proud. "You set me up," Blake whispered, the realization finally dawning on him. "You weren't in the river. You were watching." "I was always watching," I said. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet and falling onto the Persian rug. He crab walked away from me, his heels digging into the floor, terrified that I was going to strike him. "It doesn't matter," Blake yelled from the floor, his voice rising in panic again. "That video is still fake. You can't prove I did anything. You are alive. So there was no murder. You can't charge me with murder if you are standing right there." He was grasping at straws. He was trying to find a legal loophole in the middle of his nightmare. "You're right about one thing, Blake," I said, reaching into the inside pocket of my tailored jacket. "A video can be faked. Technology is a scary thing, and I am alive, so you didn't kill me. I pulled out a clear, heavy plastic evidence bag. Inside, resting on the plastic, was a pair of large, red-handled bolt cutters. They were dirty, they were greasy, and they were damning. But this I said, holding the bag up high so the light caught the steel jaws. This is real. I tossed the bag onto his lap. The heavy steel clanked against his legs. He flinched as if it were a venomous snake. I fished these out of the toolbox where you hid them, I said, my voice hard as iron. I bagged them with gloves before anyone else touched them. Your fingerprints are all over the handles, Blake. Your DNA is on the grips from your sweaty palms, and the metal shavings caught in the teeth. I leaned in close. Forensics will match those shavings to the severed brake line on my Silverado perfectly, down to the microscopic level. Blake stared at the bolt cutters. He looked at the red handles he had held in his hands just 3 days ago. He remembered the snap of the metal. He remembered the feeling of power. Now those same handles were the bars of his cage. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. Why, he whispered. Why didn't you just die? Because I had to protect my family from you, I said. Chief Miller stepped forward. He put a heavy hand on Blake's shoulder. The chief didn't look like a friend anymore. He looked like the law. Blake Vance Miller said, his voice grim and final. You are under arrest. For what? Blake screamed, trying to shake off the hand. He is alive. It is just vandalism. No, son, I said. It is not just vandalism. Miller tightened his grip. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Desmond Bell and for the assault with a deadly weapon on Walter Vance. Blake stopped struggling. He went limp. Walter? He whispered. Oh, yes, I said. Your father is very upset about his legs, Blake. He gave a full statement this morning. He told the police everything. He told them you confessed to him at the hospital. He told them you admitted to cutting the brakes. Blake looked at Tasha. She was looking down at him with eyes that held no love, only pity and disgust. Tasha. Please, Blake sobbed, reaching a hand out to her. Help me. He is lying. My dad is lying. They are all against me. Tasha stepped back out of his reach. My father gave you a gift, Blake, she said, her voice trembling with emotion but strong. He gave you a chance to be a good man. He welcomed you into this family, and you threw it away for money. She turned her back on him. Get him out of my house, she said to the chief. Miller hauled Blake to his feet. He spun him around and slapped the cuffs on. The sound of the ratchets clicking tight was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of closure. It was the sound of safety. As they dragged him toward the door, Blake started screaming. He didn't scream for forgiveness. He didn't scream for mercy. My money, he screamed. What about the land? What about the deal? I need that money. Rocco, tell them. Rocco watched him go. He didn't move to help. He simply tipped his head at me, a silent acknowledgement of a game well played. He knew he wasn't getting paid today. But he also knew that Blake Vance was going to a place where debts were paid in a different currency. Rocco slipped out the back door, disappearing like smoke. The room erupted into chaos. The guests were shouting, asking questions, pulling out their phones, but I didn't care about them. I turned to my daughter. She collapsed into my arms. I held her tight, feeling her shake, feeling her tears soak into my expensive suit. I got you, baby girl, I whispered into her hair. I got you. It is over. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears but her eyes bright. You are really here, she said. I am really here, I promised, and I am not going anywhere. But as I held her, I looked over her shoulder at Strickland. He gave me a small nod. He knew what I was thinking. Blake was gone. The immediate threat was neutralized. But there was one more loose end, one more rat who thought he could scurry away in the dark. Walter Vance was still in the hospital. He thought he was a victim. He thought he was going to sue my estate. He thought he was going to get $1 million for his broken legs. He didn't know that I had the title to the truck. He didn't know that the transfer papers were never filed. He didn't know that legally he had stolen my vehicle and crashed it. I released Tasha and straightened my jacket. I have one more stop to make, I told her. Where are you going? She asked. To the hospital, I said. I need to deliver a get well card and bring him the bill. The click of the handcuffs echoing through my living room was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. It was sharp, final, and it severed Blake Vance from the life he had stolen. Chief Miller tightened the metal loops around Blake's wrists, his face set in a grim line that brokered no argument. Blake was thrashing his expensive suit jacket, twisting around his shoulders, his hair wild and plastered to his forehead with sweat. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare, but the reality was far worse because he was the one who had written the script. "You cannot do this!" Blake screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he tried to jerk away from the chief. "This is entrapment. Look at him. Look at Desmond. He is standing right there." He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes bulging with a mixture of terror and fury. He set me up. Blake howled, his voice bouncing off the walls of the silent room. He knew I cut the brakes. He knew it the whole time, and he didn't stop me. He didn't call the police. He played a game with my life. I stood perfectly still, my arm around Tasha, watching him unravel. I did not need to shout. My silence was louder than his screams. "He gave that truck to my father on purpose," Blake yelled, turning his desperate gaze to the police officers flanking him. "That is attempted murder. He knew the brakes were gone. He knew Walter would drive it. He sent a death trap to my father's house. Arrest him. You have to arrest him too. If I am guilty, he is guilty. He was trying to drag me down into the mud with him. He was trying to muddy the waters to make it look like a feud between two men rather than a cold-blooded assassination attempt. He wanted to turn his own crime into a shared tragedy. It was a pathetic last-ditch effort by a narcissist who could not accept that he was the villain of the story." Chief Miller paused. He looked at me. He knew me. He respected me. But the law is the law, and Blake was making a specific accusation. If I had knowingly given a vehicle with severed brakes to another man to drive, I was liable. I could see the question forming in Miller's eyes. But I had prepared for this moment. I had prepared for every angle Blake Vance could possibly play. I nodded to Strickland. My lawyer stepped forward. He moved with the precision of a surgeon. He did not look at Blake. He looked at Chief Miller. He opened his briefcase, again the sound of the latches clicking like a judge's gavel. Chief Strickland said, his voice cutting through Blake's hysteria like a razor. "Before you entertain the accusations of a man who just confessed to sabotage on video, you need to see this." Strickland pulled a single sheet of paper from the file. It was blue. It was official. He handed it to the chief. Blake stopped screaming. He craned his neck, trying to see the document. He was panting, his chest heaving, his eyes darting back and forth between the paper and my face. "What is that?" Blake demanded. "What lies are you feeding him?" "It is a transfer of title and a certificate of non-operational status," Strickland said calmly. He turned to face the room, addressing the crowd as much as the police. 3 days ago, immediately after discovering the damage to his vehicle, Mr. Bell filed this paperwork with the Department of Motor Vehicles. He formally declared the 1978 Chevy Silverado as salvage. "Salvage," Blake whispered. "Scrap," Strickland clarified. "Junk. Unsafe for operation on public roads." Mr. Bell officially took the vehicle off his insurance and surrendered the plates in the system. Legally, that truck was no longer a vehicle. It was a pile of metal parts. Strickland pulled out another piece of paper, a copy of the note I had sent to Walter. "And this," Strickland continued, "is the note Mr. Bell sent with the tow truck. Please read it carefully." Chief Miller squinted at the note. "It says, 'Walter Blake told me how much you have always admired the truck. It is yours. A gift from your son." "Exactly," Strickland said. "It does not say, 'Here is a car to drive to the club.' It does not say, 'Here is a mode of transportation.' It transfers ownership of a non-operational display piece. Mr. Bell gave Mr. Walter Vance a project, a classic body for restoration." Strickland lowered the paper and looked at Blake over the rim of his glasses. "The fact that your father, Mr. Walter Vance, chose to illegally drive a vehicle that was not registered, not insured, and marked as salvage is entirely his own responsibility. He stole a ride in a junk car. He broke the law the moment he turned the key on a public road. Mr. Bell is not responsible for the reckless actions of a thief." The room went silent. The trap snapped shut. I saw the light go out in Blake's eyes. He realized the depth of the game I had played. I hadn't just given Walter the truck. I had legally insulated myself from the consequences. I had turned their greed into their own liability. Walter had driven a car that on paper was nothing more than a lawn ornament. You, you planned this, Blake wheezed. You planned every second of this. I looked at him. I stepped forward, leaving Tasha's side for a moment. I plan to go fishing, Blake, I said softly. I plan to retire. I plan to bounce my grandchildren on my knee. You are the one who changed the plans. I just finished what you started. Blake sagged in the chief's grip. He was done. He had no defense. He had no money. He had no family. But the universe, or perhaps just the company Blake kept, wasn't finished with him yet. From the back of the room, a shadow moved. It was a large, imposing figure that had been leaning against the wall watching the proceedings with the cold detachment of an executioner. It was Rocco. Most men in Rocco's line of work would have vanished the moment the police badges came out. They lived in the shadows. They avoided the law. But Rocco was a businessman, and he had just watched his $200,000 investment get handcuffed. He knew he wasn't getting his money. Blake was going to prison for a long time. The debt was dead. But Rocco operated on a code. If you can't get paid, you get even. You send a message. You make sure everyone knows that crossing you has a price, even if that price is paid in a courtroom. Rocco walked forward. The crowd parted for him, sensing the danger radiating off him. He walked right up to Chief Miller and the handcuffed Blake. "Excuse me," Chief Rocco said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried the heavy accent of the old neighborhood. Miller tensed. He knew who Rocco was. Everyone knew. Rocco, Miller said warningly, "This is a crime scene. Don't make trouble." "I am not here to make trouble," Chief Rocco said, holding up his hands. "I am here as a concerned citizen. A witness, you might say." Blake looked up at Rocco. His eyes widened in absolute horror. He shook his head frantically. "Rocco, please, don't." Rocco ignored him. He looked at the chief. "This scumbag owes me money," Rocco said, pointing a thick finger at Blake. "A lot of money. $200,000. Gambling debts. Bad bets on horses that were running on 3 legs. He confessed to a felony in front of the police. He admitted to illegal lending. He admitted to gambling. He didn't care. He was burning Blake down to the ground. He came to me last week." Rocco continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. He was crying, begging for time. He told me he had a solution. He told me his father-in-law was going to have an accident. A gasp went through the room. This was the nail in the coffin. This was the motive. It wasn't just a recording anymore. It was a witness who had no reason to lie to the police. He offered me a deal, Rocco said, his eyes drilling into Blake. He put up collateral. He told me that if I gave him 1 more week, he would pay me back with the life insurance money. Rocco leaned in close to Blake's face. "He mortgaged your life, Mr. Bell," Rocco said to me, though his eyes never left Blake. "He used your heartbeat as a down payment." He told me, "Rocco, don't worry. The old man is as good as dead. The brakes are fixed. The money is guaranteed." Rocco spit on the floor next to Blake's expensive shoes. "He is a bad investment, Chief," Rocco said, "and he is a liar. I want to file a report for fraud. He borrowed money under false pretenses. He told me he had assets. Turns out all he had was a pair of bolt cutters and a death wish." Blake let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He slumped toward the floor, his legs giving out. The officers had to hold him up. He was destroyed. He was stripped bare. Everyone in that room, everyone he had ever tried to impress, everyone he had ever lied to, now knew the truth. He wasn't a successful broker. He was a broke gambler who had tried to sell his father-in-law's life to pay a shark. Chief Miller looked at Rocco. "We will need a formal statement," Rocco Miller said. "Down at the station. I will be there," Rocco said. "I want to make sure they lock him up in a cell deep enough that he can't hear the thunder." Miller nodded. He gestured to his officers. "Get him out of here," Miller commanded. The officers dragged Blake toward the door. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was weeping. He was begging Tasha. He was begging me. He was begging God. "Dad," he screamed, looking at me. "Dad, please. I am sorry. I didn't mean it. It was just money. It was just money. Just money, I thought. Just my life. Just my daughter's happiness. Just my legacy." I watched him go. I watched them shove him into the back of the cruiser. I watched the lights flash red and blue against the gray morning sky. I felt Tasha's hand on my arm. She was shaking. "He is gone," she whispered. "He is gone," I said. The room began to buzz with noise. The guests were recovering from the shock. They were looking at me with new eyes. They weren't looking at the mechanic anymore. They were looking at the man who had just dismantled a monster without lifting a finger. But I wasn't done. The police had Blake. Rocco had burned him. But there was one more person who needed to answer for this. Walter Vance was lying in a hospital bed nursing his broken legs and his bruised ego. He thought he was a victim of a defective truck. He thought he was going to sue. He thought he was innocent. He didn't know that the law considers the driver of a stolen vehicle responsible for his own injuries, and he didn't know that by taking that truck, by driving it without permission, he had committed grand theft auto. I looked at Strickland. He was already closing his briefcase. He looked at me and nodded. "The hospital," Strickland asked. "The hospital," I said. I turned to Tasha. "Do you want to come?" I asked. Tasha wiped her face. She looked at the door where her husband had just been dragged out. Then she looked at me. "Yes," she said. "I want to see his face. I want to see them all fall." We walked out of the house, past the police cars, past the neighbors. We got into my other car, a black sedan I kept in the back garage. We drove to the hospital in silence. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of soldiers returning from a battle they had won. We were going to see Walter. And we were going to deliver the final blow. The police station was a hive of activity, but Chief Miller led me to a quiet corridor in the back. He stopped in front of a heavy door with a one-way mirror and motioned for me to look inside. It was the holding area, a sterile gray room with bolted-down benches. In the corner, Walter Vance sat in a wheelchair, his legs encased in thick plaster casts looking like a broken gargoyle. On the bench opposite him sat Blake, his head in his hands, his expensive suit now ruined and stripped of his tie and belt. They had been placed together intentionally. It was an old police tactic. Put two rats in a cage and wait for them to eat each other. I watched as Walter lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with a venomous hate I had never seen before. He wheeled himself closer to Blake, the rubber tires squeaking on the linoleum. "You stupid, arrogant boy," Walter hissed. His voice was picked up clearly by the microphones and played into the observation room where I stood. "You ruined everything. I had a lawsuit. I had a payout coming. I was going to take that estate for every dime it was worth. And you had to open your mouth. You had to confess to the police." Blake snapped his head up. "Me. You blamed me the second they put the cuffs on you. You told them I cut the brakes. You told them everything." "I was trying to save myself," Walter shouted, slamming his hand against the armrest of the wheelchair. "I didn't cut the lines. I just drove the damn truck. You are the one who tried to commit murder. I am a victim here." "A victim?" Blake laughed, a manic, broken sound. "You are an accomplice. You knew about the plan. You knew I was going to do it. You encouraged me. You said the old man was useless. You said we deserved that money. Don't act like you are innocent, Dad. You are just as guilty as I am." Walter lunged forward in the chair, swinging his arm wildly. He managed to slap Blake across the face. The sound echoed in the small room. "You are a failure," Walter screamed. "I raised you to be smart. I raised you to be a winner. And you got outsmarted by a mechanic. You got played by a man who fixes cars for a living. You are pathetic." Blake jumped up. For a second I thought he was going to strangle his father. He grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and shook it. "I did this for us," Blake yelled back, spit flying from his mouth. "I did this to pay off the debts. I did this so we could be rich. And you ruined it because you were too greedy to wait. You had to steal the truck. If you hadn't stolen the truck, none of this would have happened. Desmond would be dead in a ditch and we would be cashing checks." "Whatever you say," loser, Walter spat. "Enjoy prison. I am going to cut a deal. I am going to tell them everything. I am going to tell them about the forgery. I am going to tell them about the gambling. I am going to bury you so deep they will need a shovel to find you." Chief Miller turned to me and smiled grimly. "That is enough for conspiracy," he said. "That is enough to put them both away for a very long time. We have it all on tape. The father turning on the son turning on the father. It is a tragedy, Desmond. A pathetic, greedy tragedy." I looked at them one last time. They were still screaming, tearing at each other with words, destroying whatever shred of family loyalty they had left. It was over. The Vance family had imploded under the weight of their own avarice. Later that afternoon, Tasha asked to see Blake one last time. Chief Miller allowed it, setting up a meeting in the visitation room with the glass partition. I stood in the back in the shadows just in case she needed me. Tasha walked in carrying a thick black binder. She sat down on the metal stool and looked at the man she had married. Blake looked awful. His eyes were swollen. He looked at Tasha with a desperate, pleading expression. "Tasha, baby," he said, pressing his hand against the glass. "Thank God you are here. You have to get me a lawyer. A real lawyer, not a public defender. You have to talk to your dad. Tell him to drop the charges. Tell him it was a mistake. I can fix this. We can fix this. Tasha did not reach for the phone to speak to him. She simply leaned forward and spoke loudly enough to be heard through the vent. I am not here to help you, Blake. I am here to show you something. Blake blinked, confused. Show me what. Tasha opened the binder. She pressed a document against the glass. It was a corporate registration for a company called Shadow Creek Holdings. Do you remember Shadow Creek? Tasha asked. The company Dad owed $500,000 to, the debt that made you run away, the debt that made you try to sell his land to a toxic waste company. Yeah, Blake said, his eyes darting back and forth. The loan sharks, the ones who were going to take the house. Read the name of the sole proprietor, Tasha said. Read the name of the CEO. Blake squinted. He read the line. Desmond Bell. He pulled back, confusion clouding his face. What? That doesn't make sense. Your dad owns the company he owes money to. It is a holding company, Blake. Tasha said, her voice cold and sharp. Dad created it to protect his assets. He owes money to himself. The debt was zero. It was a test. A test to see if you would stand by me when the chips were down. And you failed. You ran. She flipped the page. She pressed a spreadsheet against the glass. And this, she said. This is the asset list for Shadow Creek Holdings. Blake looked. He read the lines. Commercial property. A. Downtown garage complex. Industrial park. B. Apartment complex. C. His eyes widened until they looked like saucers. He was reading a list of 15 prime commercial real estate properties scattered across the state. He was reading the valuation of a chain of high-end mechanic shops. He was reading the balance of investment accounts that had been growing silently for 40 years. He is not a mechanic, Blake. Tasha said. He is an investor. He is a developer. He owns half the industrial district. Blake started to shake. He looked at the bottom line of the spreadsheet. The total net worth. It was a number with 7 digits. A number that started with a 2 and ended with a lot of zeros. $20 million. 20 million, Blake whispered. The breath left his body. He looked at Tasha. He looked at me, standing in the shadows. He is rich, Blake stammered. He is rich. He is filthy rich. He is successful, Tasha corrected. Because he worked. Because he built. He didn't steal. He didn't gamble. Blake slid out of his chair. He fell to his knees on the other side of the glass. He started to claw at the partition. No, he wailed. No, no, no. I had it. I had it all. He was crying now, ugly, racking sobs. But he wasn't crying because he had lost his wife. He wasn't crying because he had hurt his family. He was crying because he had been sleeping on a winning lottery ticket and he had tried to burn it for insurance money. I could have been rich, Blake screamed, banging his fists against the glass. I could have managed it. I could have run the company. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he tell me? Because you are a thief, Tasha said, closing the binder, and you are a murderer, and you don't deserve a penny of it. She stood up. She looked down at him one last time. My lawyer will send the divorce papers to the prison, she said. Do not contest them. Tasha turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She walked straight into my arms. I held her for a moment, listening to Blake's screams echoing in the room. He was howling like a wounded animal. He was mourning the loss of the only thing he had ever truly loved. Money. I looked at him through the glass. Our eyes met. He stopped screaming for a second. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated envy. I gave you a chance, son, I said quietly, though I knew he couldn't hear me through the glass. You just bet on the wrong horse. I turned and walked out of the visitation room with my daughter. We left Blake Vance alone in his cage, trapped with the knowledge of what could have been. He would spend the next 20 years thinking about that spreadsheet. He would spend every night in his cell counting the millions he had lost because he couldn't wait. He would be haunted not by his crimes, but by his greed. And that was a punishment far worse than anything the law could inflict. 1 week after the arrest, the dust had finally begun to settle around my house. The police tape was gone. The The tire marks from Blake's frantic arrival were still visible on the lawn, a scar on the grass that would take time to heal. I was sitting on my porch drinking iced tea and watching the sun go down when a beat-up sedan pulled into the driveway. I knew who it was before the door opened. It was Linda Vance, Blake's mother, the woman who had been on the other end of the video call, the woman who had told him to wear black to my funeral. She walked up the steps slowly. She looked nothing like the arrogant woman I had met at the wedding. Her hair was unkempt, and her face was puffy from crying. She wore a coat that looked 2 sizes too big, as if she had shrunk inside her own skin. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, clutching her purse with both hands. "Mr. Bell," she said, her voice trembling. I did not offer her a seat. I did not offer her tea. I just looked at her. "I came to apologize," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I came to ask for mercy. Blake is my only son. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But he is not a killer. He was just desperate. He was under so much pressure." I took a sip of my tea. "He cut my brake lines, Linda," I said. "That is not pressure. That is premeditation. And you knew. You listened to him plan it. You laughed." She flinched as if I had struck her. "I didn't think he would actually do it," she sobbed. "I thought it was just talk. Please, Mr. Bell, you have so much. You have millions. Can't you just drop the charges? Can't you say it was a misunderstanding? If he goes to prison, he will die in there." I set my glass down on the railing. I looked at this woman who had raised a monster and then tried to protect him when he showed his teeth. "He is where he belongs," I said. Linda fell to her knees on the gravel. "Please," she wailed. "We have nothing left. Walter is crippled. The insurance won't pay because he stole the truck. We are losing our house. We have nowhere to go. Help us, just a little help, for the sake of the family we almost were." I looked at her. I felt a flicker of pity, but I extinguished it immediately. Pity was what got me into this mess. Pity was what allowed Blake to think he could walk all over me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my checkbook. Linda's eyes lit up. She stopped crying. She thought she had won. She thought the check was going to be for thousands. Maybe enough to save her house. Maybe enough to hire a new lawyer. I wrote the check slowly. I tore it out with a crisp, ripping sound. I walked down the steps and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands. She looked at the amount. $180. She looked up at me, confusion marring her face. "What is this?" "It is the price of a one-way bus ticket to the other side of the country," I said. "There is a bus leaving at midnight. I suggest you and Walter be on it." She stared at me, mouth agape. "You want me to leave town? I want you to disappear," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "I want you to go so far away that I never have to see your face or hear your name again. If I see you in this city tomorrow, Linda, I will file charges against you as an accomplice to attempted murder. I have the recording of your call too. Do not test me." She looked at the check. She looked at my face. She saw that the door was closed, locked, bolted. She stood up slowly. She didn't say another word. She turned around, got back into her beat-up car, and drove away. She took the money. I knew she would. Greed does not die easily, even when it is starving. 6 months later, the trial concluded. It was swift. The evidence was insurmountable. The video of Blake cutting the brakes was played on national news. The testimony of his own father claiming he was manipulated sealed his fate. Blake Vance was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security prison without the possibility of parole for at least 15. When the judge read the sentence, Blake did not scream. He did not cry. He just slumped in his chair, a hollow shell of a man. He looked back at the gallery. He looked for Tasha. But she wasn't there. She had better things to do. Tasha had transformed. The grief of the betrayal had burned away the naive girl who wanted to please everyone. In her place stood a woman of steel. She filed for divorce the day after the arrest. She did not ask for alimony. She did not ask for a settlement. She just asked for her name back. She stood in the judge's chambers and signed the papers with a gold fountain pen I had given her. When she walked out, she was Tasha Bell again, and she was ready to work. She quit her job at the hospital. She told me she was tired of fixing people who broke themselves. She wanted to build things. She wanted to learn the family business. I brought her into Shadow Creek Holdings not as a figurehead, but as an apprentice. I taught her how to read a commercial lease. I taught her how to spot a foundation crack in a warehouse. I taught her how to negotiate with city planners and how to stare down a contractor who was trying to pad the bill. She was a natural. She had my mind for details and her mother's charm. Within a year, she was running the day-to-day operations of the property management division. She walked into meetings with men who had been in the business for 30 years, and she commanded the room. They whispered that she was tough. They whispered that she was cold. Good, I told her when she reported the gossip. If they think you are cold, they won't try to burn you. One evening, a year after the nightmare began, Tasha and I drove up to the highest point in the county. It was a scenic overlook on the edge of the new industrial park we were developing. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. We leaned against the hood of my new car. It wasn't a Chevy Silverado. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek and black, a symbol of the empire we had secured. Tasha looked out over the city lights flickering to life below us. She looked strong. She looked happy. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked quietly. Sometimes, I admitted. I think about the man he could have been. I think about the waste of it all. I think about the breaks, she said. I think about how close we came to losing everything. If you hadn't been in the garage, Dad, if you hadn't heard him. I put my arm around her shoulders. But I was there, baby girl. I was watching. She looked at me. "Why did you let it go so far?" she asked. "Why did you let him give the truck to Walter? Why did you let me almost sign those papers?" I looked at the city. I looked at the empire I had built from nothing. Because sometimes, Tasha, you have to let the snake into the house, I said. You have to let it think it is safe. You have to let it coil up and get comfortable. You have to let it show you its fangs. Because if you chase it away in the garden, it will just come back when you are sleeping. I turned to her and smiled. You have to let it in so you can cut off its head. And you have to make sure everyone sees you do it. So the other snakes know to stay away. Tasha nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. She looked at her hand. She was still wearing her mother's ring. It sparkled in the twilight. "I learned my lesson, Dad," she said. "I won't let anyone in again without checking their teeth first." "That is my girl," I said. We got back into the car. The interior smelled of rich leather and success. I started the engine. It purred like a lion. We drove down the winding road, leaving the past behind us in the darkness. We had scars. We had memories that would haunt us. But we also had the future. And for the Bell family, the future was brighter than it had ever been. My name is Desmond Bell. I am a mechanic. I am a father. And I am the man who taught a thief that you cannot steal what cannot be taken. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and revenge. And remember, always check your brakes. You never know who might be watching. In the end, Blake Vance thought he was cutting a brake line, but he was actually severing his own future. He made the fatal mistake of judging a man by the grease on his hands instead of the content of his character. He believed wealth was something you display, not something you build with patience and honor. Through this ordeal, my daughter Tasha learned that true strength isn't about endurance. It's about knowing when to walk away from toxicity. And I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to a greedy man is give him exactly what he thinks he wants. Family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty and betrayal. That is a debt that always comes due. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. Have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself? Let me know your story in the comments below.